So did everybody get one of the handouts out there from Brenda? Okay. You think?
Good morning. Oh, okay. Good morning. My name is Brenda Thomas. I am part of the team for OAGM Acquisition Workforce Division under Fermaine Brown. I thank you very much for coming this morning for the small business training. We've put this training together specifically for you, for CMS, so that you can learn more about the small business process. Today we have with us Mr. Dedmon and Dr. Bellany, and they're going to be your teachers for today. Please enjoy the class. For those that are viewing us on YouTube, if you have any questions, please email me at brenda.thomas@cms.hhs.gov. Unfortunately, right now, our WebEx number, call-in number is not up, so that's why you can email me if you have any questions. Enjoy the class. Thank you.
Good, thank you, Brenda. Okay, so as Brenda said, we're going to be here for somewhere between now and 5 or 6 hours from now. And so there's some administrative things I'd like to get out of the way just for those of you in the room, not necessarily for those of you that are watching on YouTube. If you go straight back down the hall, there's some bathrooms that are there. And apparently if you go all the way back out by the main entrance and go down the stairs, there's a cafeteria there. So my plan is that we're going to go for about 50 minutes. We're going to take a break for about 10 minutes, and we'll take a break at lunchtime, sometime around 11:45 for maybe an hour and 15 minutes or so. So we'll play that kind of by ear, and we'll see where we are and what we need to accomplish. But we've got a certain amount of things that we want to cover today as we talk about both HHS, CMS, small business, and kind of acquisition in general, okay? So let me introduce myself. My name is Tony Dedmon, and I work for a company that's called ASI Government. So over the course of this period of time we're talking about, we're going to go through a number of different things. We're going to start with some introductions of me, and since we have such a small crowd, we may actually let you get to one of these mics and introduce yourselves just so we can kind of see who's here. We're going to talk about mission and budget. For me, whenever we spend money for the federal government, we should understand what the overall purpose of spending that money is. And so when we look at the HHS mission or the CMS mission, the thing I like to bring into perspective is everything that you're doing and everything that you're buying, is that toward that mission that we talk about that's so important that we actually document it, and that's what your management is looking for you to do? I like to put everyone on the same page by going through some of the guiding principles for the FAR. And I know some of you may be contracting officers or cores or PMs or whatever your different roles are. But the bottom line is it never hurts to put everybody on the same page, and that's what we're going to do with this FAR Part 1, Guiding Principles. We're going to talk about the Small Business Administration, both their mission and kind of an overview. We're going to talk about how HHS is doing as far as setting aside or spending dollars on small businesses, so we'll get to that. And then we're going to look at some acquisition initiatives. No conversation on small business, large business, or any other kind of business when we come to acquisition would be complete without a discussion on market research. So we're going to go into quite a bit of detail on that. Okay? Then we're going to talk about a few completely small business kind of things. The partnership agreement, set-asides, the kind of mentor-protege arrangements we have with small business and large business. We'll talk about some NAICS codes. Subcontracting plan, small business participation plan, and joint venture teaming. We have a policy that's come out of OMB, and I understand it may be in the process of being changed again, but we're trying to pay our small business vendors within 15 days. A lot of agencies, and I'll find out what you guys do here, but a lot of agencies are paying all invoices within 15 days just so that they can make sure that large businesses that have small business components to them or small business subcontracts are also paying those vendors as quickly as they can. So we'll talk about that when we get to it. We want to talk about competitive range, a few things about roles and responsibilities for some of the people that can help us from the Small Business Administration. And then finally, we'll talk about some vendor communications and how it is so important for us in this whole spirit of cooperation that we have now in 2017. We used to have an adversarial relationship with vendors where we would be us versus them. Now we're trying to do it more in the spirit of cooperation, and so we're going to talk about that. And so when we talk about these vendor communications, that's what we want to get to. And that's how we're going to wrap up the day. At any point in time that you have questions of anything that I'm covering, or if Dr. Blaney steps in and covers part of this, if you have any questions for him, stop us then, allow us to answer the question so that it's not something that's going to be burning or that you may forget by the time we get to any kind of a specific question and answer kind of period. Okay? So any questions on any of that? Okay. So a couple of things. The top guy there is Dr. Blaney, who's sitting down there. You can read his bio. Would you like to introduce yourself at all? Maybe grab one of these microphones.
For those of you on YouTube, I'm Dr. Blaney. For those of you in the room, I'm sitting down in the corner. Welcome aboard.
Okay, so as I said before, my name is Tony Dedmon. I spent about 23 years on active duty in the Army. So I started out in armor, which is tanks. I went into aviation, which was flying helicopters, which was actually a lot of fun. And hard to believe that you actually get paid to do that. But then I actually went into acquisition, and I joined the Acquisition Corps back in about 1980, I want to say 5, and I've actually been focused on acquisition ever since then. So all that actually means is that I'm pretty darn old, okay? But more importantly, what it means is that I've been a PM both in the military and as a civilian. I was a PM for a company called L3 Communications. You may have heard of them. I was working for a company that's called Titan out in San Diego. We were bought by L3, so I ended up being a PM for L3 as well. Since then, I went to work for a company called ASI Government. I've been with them since about 2006. And you can see that I've gone through a bunch of different acquisition-related kind of schools and management-related kind of schools. And I actually now support, as my day job, Homeland Security under the Department of Homeland Security in FEMA, okay? And since FEMA's getting a lot of attention this weekend, I was looking at this going, oh my God, by the time I get back tomorrow, half of my office is probably going to be deployed to Houston, so we'll see. But anyway, just wanted to kind of introduce myself. I'd like to take just a moment, and we can take this microphone down here, and just let people just kind of say who you are and what your acquisition experience is, so we just get a feel for who's in the room, okay? So I'll start with you, ma'am, and if you can just hand it to the next person, and you guys keep kind of going that way.
Yes. Good morning. My name is Joyce Lewis. I'm in Ethics Division, and I'm a Core 3.
All right.
Morning, my name is Joyce Olabisi. I'm just training with to get my cars.
So are you a Core yet, or are you going to? You're a Core 1, okay.
Good morning. My name is Dorothy Brownser, and I work in OFM, and I'm a Core 3, and I have been a Core on 2 contracts.
Okay, and you're a certified financial manager?
No.
Oh, okay.
Hi, my name is Tina Dickens, and I am a Core 2 with about 4 contracts.
Okay.
My name is Nancy Zhang. I'm a Core 2.
Hi, my name is Julie Gover. I'm a Core 3.
Okay.
Hi, my name is Nancy McBride. I'm a Core 2 in OIT.
Okay.
Good morning. My name is Gregory Birch. I work in OIT, and I'm a Core 2 for 2 different systems.
Okay.
Hi, I'm Dave Weatherson. I work in the CCSQ Survey and CERT group, and work more on the procurement side now with planning, and used to work in our contracts office as a contract specialist.
So you're 1102? Okay. Did we get you 2 ladies?
Hi, I'm Sherry Costco. I'm a Core 3, and I'm trying to recertify.
Okay. Well, you get a few hours toward that. How's that?
I'm Roseanne Dean, and I'm a Core 3 with OIT.
Okay. So we're well represented here, which is good. but I like to kind of figure out who we're talking to and what we're talking about so that I can actually focus what it is that we're going to plan to talk about so that it's of the most value to you, okay? So one of the things that we're going to actually spend some time talking about today is kind of acquisition in general and obviously small business specifically. So let's talk starting with the HHS mission and strategic goals. So the mission of almost every government agency is huge. And one of the things that we have to keep in mind is that the federal government generally does things that no one else would ever be even approaching thinking about doing because it's just too massive, okay? So especially here, Medicare, Medicaid, those are huge programs, okay? And we'll see kind of how huge they are. But the mission of the Department of Health and Human Services is to enhance the health and well-being of Americans by providing for effective health and human services by fostering sound, sustained advances in the sciences, underlining medicine, public health, and social services. You've got these 4 strategic goals. You can see that I've really emphasized 2 of them. Advanced scientific knowledge and innovation. Innovation is something that we get in many cases through contracting, okay? And so when we look at the dollars that we spend, one of the things that we have to focus on is how can we get the maximum bang for the buck for the dollars that we spend, okay? And so let's keep that whole approach in mind. So when we talk about innovation, there are 2 things that we get innovation from, and the first thing is competition. Competition does a couple things. Competition drives prices down, and it drives innovation up. Just put into perspective, and we got some people here from OIT. Think about the iPhone. Do you think we would be on an iPhone 87 if we didn't have Samsung? For those of you that may be more senior like me, you can go back to the days when we used to have that black phone on the desk. You remember how long that black phone was on our desk until they broke up the Baby Bells? Do you remember that whole breaking up the Baby Bells thing that actually spurred competition? From the date that that happened to now, we went from that black phone strapping us to a desk to where we now have cell phones that we can put in our pocket and talk anywhere in the world. This was long before, those black phones on the desk were long before we had laptops and computers and all those other things. We had just that phone to communicate with. And now we have something that, you know, as we go through the day, think about that innovation. And if we get that kind of innovation with that kind of electronics, what is it that we can do from a health and human services standpoint that you can help us advance? But we want to ensure efficiency. That's, once again, trying to do things as quickly and as wisely as we can. Transparency, we're the federal government. We can't hide what we do. Accountability, that's obviously important. And then effectiveness. So efficiency, effectiveness, and all of those things are things that we'd like to have in almost anything we do. So very good mission statement, great goals. Everyone should be aware of those. And every time you go to spend a dime of HHS money, you should keep that mission and those goals in mind. Okay? Any questions on that? Okay. So a lot of people don't know this, but the overall budget for the United States of America is about $3.7 trillion. $3.7 trillion. A billion is 9 zeros. A trillion is 12 zeros, so that's a huge number, okay? That $3.7 trillion is actually broken kind of into a couple different components. The first is entitlements, which you guys should be very familiar with because things like Social Security, which is down the road, Medicare, Medicaid, which you guys run. I'm retired military, so my retired military pay, those things are all entitlements, and they just kind of crank out regardless of what happens. There's no way that you can control that. It's just coming out regardless of, that's on autopilot. The next thing, though, is the things that we can spend that are called discretionary. And discretionary means that we have a choice. We can have a choice on what we spend that on. And so one of the slides is going to say that we actually contract, not we here just at CMS, but we in the federal government contract out about $500 billion a year, okay? That's a huge number, $500 billion. So let's talk about what HHS does because you guys play a big role in that. The total Outlays, which is this 2017, is 1.14 billion, okay? So when you look at this little chart here, it shows this 1.145 billion in outlays, of which 52% goes for Medicare and 34% goes for Medicaid. And then notice that only 8% is there for discretionary programs after that, okay? So when you look at those numbers, that's for all of HHS. Let's look at what it is just for CMS. So for CMS, your budget is actually about 737 million, okay, because these are dollars and millions. So $737 million, and of that $737 million, about $751,000 is discretionary, and everything else goes for grants, payments to healthcare trust, and program management, okay? Does everybody see that? So when you look at the numbers that you have and you think about what it is that we have that we can use as a hammer to drive public policy, that's what we want to talk about, is driving public policy. So the $500 billion that they have in the federal government total, the 751 million or 751,000 that you guys are using here, okay? So these are great numbers to have. Just trust me when I tell you, that's a very, very large chunk of money, okay? So, let's start with the statement of guiding principles for the federal acquisition regulation. Okay, so one of the things that a lot of people say is, where does this come from? And you see that it's 1.102 in the FAR, in the Federal Acquisition Regulation. The key thing that'll happen is, if you actually go to the FAR, you'll see that this is actually on page 1 of the FAR. So this is actually page 1 of the FAR. So that statement of guiding principles where it says the vision for the federal acquisition system is to deliver on a timely basis the best value product or service. Let's ask the people that are here. When you think of best value, what is it that you think of? What comes to your mind when you think of best value? And just kind of shout it out and I'll repeat it. Is it Monday morning? Yes, okay. But I still would like to hear from you, okay? What was that? Biggest bang for the buck. That is an absolute great thing there, okay? That I would consider that to be best value. What else? What are we looking for with best value? So are you saying risk because they don't have experience? Yeah, so we always want to look at risk. Risk is something that's very important, and that's a component of best value that we always have to consider as part of our whole acquisition process, right? So when we look at risk, always look at risk in a couple different ways. The first is, what is the probability of something happening? We call that likelihood. And then, what is the impact if that happens, okay? And so I don't know how many people here watch Home and Garden television, or if I'm the only one in the room, but whenever I watch that, I always think to myself that they always plan with the best intentions. They're going to do their bathroom, they're going to do their kitchen, they're going to do their yards. They've got all these plans. But as soon as they start working, what happens? They discover that the roof is leaking, or that, you know, a pipe has broken, or something else has happened, and they have to change those plans. So when we talk about risk, especially when it comes to best value, that's something we want to think about. So turn your handouts over, and what I've listed there for best value are some things that I consider to be part of best value, and you can take notes right on that, okay? I'll try to put things in this perspective, and I'll use the home and garden example. I'll continue with that example. So when you think about best value, I want you to think about this in terms of you have a general contractor that's coming to your home to do work in your bathroom. Let's just say that, okay? And so when that general contractor comes to your home and you have a conversation, you have some expectations from a management perspective that says, I'd like for this person to make sure that they get the right people to the right place, which is my home, at the right time, which is what he's agreed to, or she's agreed to, and that they have the right tools, the right skill sets, okay? I want to bring people in because they have more ability than me. So if I'm bringing someone to work on my home, it's stuff that I can't do myself, right? And so use that same logic when you think about what you expect from contractors when you go out and contract with them, okay? If you're a core and you're out contracting for something, you want to make sure that their management gets the right people with the right tools and the right skill sets to the right place at the right time. You want to make sure that they satisfy you as a customer, and you want to make sure that when they leave, they clean up after themselves. That's just kind of basic stuff, right? So from a management perspective, when we look at best value, that's my expectation for best value, okay? Second, technical proficiency. Everything that we do in the federal government requires some level of technical expertise. You've got people here that are doctors and lawyers and scientists and engineers and all kinds of things that are doing things. Look at the IT people that were trying to put together Obamacare and the state plans and all those kind of things. We need to have vendors that are technically proficient. They should be more technically proficient than we are, or as a minimum, they should be as technically proficient as we are, and they're adding an extra set of hands to what we're doing, okay? So when we look at technical, from a best value perspective, that's my minimum expectation, is that they're at least as proficient as we are, and hopefully more, because I want them to bring added value to the table, which is one of the reasons we're using vendors. I don't bring in a plumber to work on my bathroom if I have some plumbing expertise myself. And if I do bring a plumber in, that plumber sure as heck better be a whole lot better at doing it than I am, or else I'm not going to pay whatever his or her rates are to come in and do it, okay? Same expectation when you have people working in your home, okay? The third thing that I look at, and this is only based on years and years of experience, I would have people come in and they would try to sell me something, and they would send in these really high-powered people to convince me to get a contract with them. And so when I would do that, I would say, yes, I really want that team to come in and help me. And then when I would contract with them, that team didn't show up. It was people that didn't have the same level of experience, the same level of expertise, and didn't have the same education in many cases. Or if they did have the education, they had it, but they had just literally graduated from college and had no experience and no expertise, okay? If we announce in our contract, and if you get your contracting officers to write into your contract those people as key personnel, then one of the things that that allows you to do is to insist that the people that they bring in have at least that minimum education, experience, and expertise, okay? So we'll talk about that a little bit more as we get into market research, but I just want you to understand that resumes to me are pretty darn important, okay? The fourth thing is, and this is one that kind of begs for you to do some thinking about it, okay? When you are having someone doing work, wouldn't you like to know that they've done that somewhere else before and they've got some kind of a track record? So the good news with the federal government, especially for those of you that are cores, is that you get an opportunity to actually prepare a contractor performance assessment report. You've heard it called CPARs, right? And so that contractor performance assessment report that you do actually grades them on their ability to be on schedule, to have the technical ability that we talked about, to have the management in place, to have the regulatory guidelines that they follow, their ability to subcontract. So we're evaluating a lot of different things on that CPARs. And the nice thing about that is it goes into a system that's called PPERS, which is the Past Performance Information Retrieval System. And when it goes into that system for the next 3 years, we get a chance to either see if they've been good, bad, or ugly, okay? And that's only a 3-year look, so understand that when you do that, if they're bad, it's in there for 3 years. If it's good, it's in there for 3 years. And at the end of 3 years, kind of like bankruptcy on your financial records, right? It goes away. But for that 3 years, anybody that looks in there to see what kind of past performance they've had, that stands out as saying, these guys are really good, let's use them again. These folks were really bad, let's never use them again, okay? So that's the way that's why we want to make sure that we look as part of this best value at past performance. And then the last thing after we've gone through all of that now then we'll look at price, okay? So a lot of people look at price first. Oh, I want to get the cheapest, you know. But if you're going out to spend money for yourself, how often do you go and say, I'm going to buy the lowest price car? Or do you say, here's what I'm looking for in a car, let's see how much it is, and then you start trying to figure out what do I not need or what can I add to get to the price that I'm willing to pay. And it's the same thing with your contracts, okay? We want to make sure that we're getting best value. So we have another thing that's not on here, but at one end of the spectrum is this best value. At the other end of that continuum is something that we call lowest price technically acceptable. You guys have heard of LPTA? Who's heard of that? Raise your hand. Okay. So when you talk about LPTA, what I want you to do on your little sheets is just put a check mark next to technical and a check mark next to price. Because at that point, you're not looking at anything except the lowest price that's technically acceptable, and if they're, that's it, that's all you're looking at, is the lowest price and technically acceptable. So let's talk about technically acceptable for just one minor second, okay? Technically acceptable does not mean technically exceptional. It doesn't mean technically wonderful. It means that they've met whatever that lowest bar that you have for technical acceptability, and then that's what that bar is, and then lowest price is lowest price, okay? So once you determine that that they have the lowest price, you could see if they're technically acceptable, and for all intents and purposes, your source selection is made, okay? Now, we don't do that because we have to go through and look at all of the different proposals, but the bottom line is if we're going LPTA, we're not at the other end of that spectrum that includes management and technical and resumes and past performance and price, okay? So keep all of that in mind, okay? Any questions on that? So when we go back to the front side here where we're talking about best value, the best value product or service to the customer, that's what we're talking about. Now the second part of that sentence is while maintaining the public's trust and fulfilling public policy objectives. So just from your own background and your own adventures with the federal acquisition system, what would you consider to be some of the public policy objectives? Keeping in mind that we have that big hammer of $3.7 trillion and we have those little hammers of that $500 billion that we're going to do in contracts, okay? $500 billion in contracts gives us the ability to influence a lot of things, okay? So what would you consider to be public policy objectives that we would like to try to influence? Right. So I've already mentioned one, right? I've talked about competition. That's actually legislated. So if you go into the FAR, we had a thing called SECA, right? Competition and Contracting, that says that when we let contracts, then that's the Competition and Contracting Act, and it was passed, and we have to actually follow that. But I'm looking more for some of the things that we have to do that take people that have been kind of marginalized, and it's one of the reasons we're actually here today, is we'd like to talk about people that have been marginalized that we can actually bring into the fold and give them an opportunity to succeed that they may have never gotten if we didn't have that big $500 billion contracting weapon to try to help them out, okay? So if you once again turn to the back of your form there are some things that I like to talk to. So the first one there is this National Institute for the Blind, NIB, and the National Institute for the Severely Handicapped, which is NISH. And both of those are people that are blind or severely disabled. And if they decide that they're going to start a business, and some of them have, then they actually market their products under the category that's known as Ability 1. So if you ever see something that says Ability 1, these are people from NIB and from NISH that we'd like to, if at all possible, give them some of our business. And if you go to FAR Part 8, where it has some of the mandatory places that we have to go, this is one of them that they would encourage us to use by the FAR. The second one is we have people that are incarcerated. So the people that are in the federal prison system have an industry that's called Federal Prison Industries, and they actually market their products under the heading called Unicor. So Unicor is actually designed so that people that are incarcerated will be given an opportunity to develop a skill set. And by developing that skill set, theoretically, and this is only theoretically, I've never seen it in practice, but I'm sure it works, they won't then go out and commit crimes again because now they have the ability to go out and get a job, become legal citizens, become taxpayers, and raise a family and do all those things that would cut down on recidivism, which is what we're trying to do. So recidivism is that turnstile that says they commit a crime, they go to jail, they get out, they commit a crime, they go to jail, they get out. And so if we can stop that cycle by teaching them a skill, and by us trying to use Unicore when we can, then let's see if we can do that. One other thing that I haven't mentioned yet that I will mention before we get into the next categories here is that people that are in one of these categories tend to hire people from their category to work for them, okay? I know that some of you have noticed this, and I'm not going to give any examples that'll get me in trouble, but the whole bottom line is that a lot of people that are disabled tend to hire people that are disabled to work for them. People that are former prisoners tend to hire people that have been incarcerated to work for them. They're more comfortable being with people that are from whatever their particular subset of the population is. And so as we get into the rest of these, I want you to keep that in mind, okay? So one of the other things is I talked about this competition where we want to actually go out and try to be as competitive as we can, and we have an act that talks to being competitive. And it's an important act, I told you, because of those two things. So I've actually written on the sheet here is that competition drives the prices down and it drives innovation up. Competition is the absolute most important thing that we can do to continue to drive innovation to the point that things are getting faster and better and cheaper and smaller and all of those things that we're looking for. Competition does all of that, primarily because people want to survive. Companies, as a general rule, only survive for 2 to 3 years maximum, and then they go out of business. How many of you have actually gone to a restaurant and had a line that was out the door? You put your name on the waiting list, and they tell you to come back in an hour and a half, and then you go back 2 weeks later, and the restaurant is closed. And you go, how could this be? How could that possibly happen, right? And the reason it happens is because you have people that run businesses that don't know how to run a business. They don't know that yesterday's leftovers should be tomorrow's specials, you know, that kind of thing, right? Whatever it is, I don't run restaurants, but that's just an example of things that you should know if you're going to be in that business, right? And so when I see that happen, I always remark to myself, I wonder what it would have happened if they had had some kind of an ability to work with other people so that they could maintain some success and be able to work with others. So the next part of this whole conversation from a public policy perspective is that we want all businesses to be successful, but we want to try to bring more people into the federal government contracting role, okay? So the first thing we're going to talk about is woman-owned businesses. Women make up 53% of the population. What percentage of woman-owned businesses do you think do business with the federal government? 53% of the population. How many people think it's 53? How many people think it's 25? How many people think it's 15? How many people think it's 10? What if I told you that it's actually 5% or less? 5% or less. 53% of the population, 5% or less. That's pitiful, okay? So one of the things we want to do is we want to encourage women to own businesses, and if they decide to do that, then we're going to give them kind of a running head start. For the first 6 or 7 years that they're running that business, we're going to try to give them business as a set-aside in some cases. We're going to encourage them to team with other people in a mentor-protege arrangement that we're going to talk about a little bit later in this talk. And more importantly, what we're going to try to do is give them every chance at being successful, okay? So we do the same thing for minority-owned businesses. We call them 8As, and you guys have all heard of 8As, but a lot of people think, oh, that's all African-American owned. But it's Hispanic-American owned, it's Aleutian-American owned, it's, you know, Asian-American owned. It's all kinds of different people fit into minority-owned businesses. And if the minorities decide that they're going to start a business, once again, we're going to give them this head start. We're going to try to give them business so that they can be successful. We're going to try to encourage them to team with other businesses so that they can increase that probability of succeeding, and that's all the things that we want to do. The third category of the small business is veteran-owned. These are people that have served in the military, that are now out, they've either retired or left the military, and they're trying to start a business. And more importantly, since they were veterans, we're going to give them this break, but if they were disabled and a veteran, so that we have a special category that's called SDVOSB, Service Disabled Veteran-Owned Small Business. When we do that, then they actually get even a bigger break. They can stay in the program a little bit longer, the dollars get a little bit larger, and the NAICS codes that apply are, in many cases, reinforced. So those are all things that we would like to do. And once again, if veterans tend to hire other veterans, disabled veterans tend to hire other disabled veterans. I went to Fort Lewis, Washington, a place out in Washington State here, about 2 years ago, and I had to work with a company that the entire company was made up of disabled veterans. And it was a company that did nothing but small vehicle repairs. They changed tires and they changed engines and all kinds of small vehicles that the military uses. They had people that were missing arms and legs and all kinds of different injuries. And these were the hardest working people that you've ever seen. Why? They were hard working because they were given a chance. That is a huge deal, that they were given a chance. And by being given a chance, they now were taking advantage of that chance, and they were, instead of having to rely on VA for their health benefits, which they could still use obviously, they could get it through their company. They were able to have a paycheck that they had every month. They could raise a family. They could, buy a home. They could pay taxes. All those things that we would encourage our citizens to do, they were now able, instead of laying somewhere feeling sorry for themselves, they could actually get out there and do that kind of work. So whether you're a woman, a veteran, whether you're disabled or not disabled, if you're in these categories, the nice thing is that as a public policy objective, we're going to try to see if we can help you, okay? So then the last category, and this is one that's of particular significance to me, is called historically underutilized business zones. So an historically underutilized business zone, since we're talking about small business here, right? This is where some person, some company, some corporation has decided that they're going to put a business in a place where business has just never been very successful. It's not a place that you would normally pick to put a business. But if you do, and we've got a lot of examples of that. So if you ever, I don't know how long many of you have lived here in Baltimore in this area. If you look at the Inner Harbor, remember the Inner Harbor before it was the Inner Harbor? It was an area that was not real great to go to, and they had a whole bunch of row houses and things that were really, really in a bad state of repair, and you had the nice water there, but everything around it was just completely unacceptably disreputable, okay? Same thing with Nationals Park and even Camden Yards here, both of those. Just think of putting a baseball park in an area where no one would ever really want to actually do any business. And once they put those parks there, they put a park, and I'll use National Park for anybody who's from DC. Nationals Park was put in an area that's right outside of the capital area of Washington, D.C. that used to be so bad that their crime was so terrible that the policemen didn't even like going there, okay? It was really, really bad. But they put that ballpark there, and fast forward 10 years, and now I go to a ballpark, I park my car, I I walk, 6 blocks to the ballpark. I'm not feeling threatened. I see people pushing baby strollers and jogging and playing tennis, and it's like, wow. The houses that are around there are very similar to the houses around the Inner Harbor. I don't know if you remember when people were able to buy those buildings for $1. Does anybody remember that? Do you think you can buy those buildings for $1 now? No. You know why? Because of what we call hub zones, right? By putting a business there, they made it so that those property values came up. The crime went down, the schools were better, people that lived there were able to walk to a job interview and walk home at lunch to have lunch with their children or their spouse. And so it's one of those things where by doing this, you can really turn things around. And so from a public policy perspective, that's one of the things that we're trying to do, okay? So any questions on kind of some of these public policy objectives that we have for the federal acquisition system. Okay? So let's go back to our FAR Part 1 again. Sorry about that. So the next part of this is participants in the acquisition process should work together as a team. So one of the reasons that we talk about teams is because when you go into an environment where you have your knowledge and you pretty much know what it is that you're doing and you're an expert in your own right, what you don't realize is that there are other people that have that same expertise, but they're bringing it to the table from a different perspective. Or they have a different expertise that they're going to bring in and look at your problem from their perspective, okay? So if I'm a legal person, I look at it differently than you may look at it. If I'm a technical person, I may look at it differently. If I'm logistics, I may look at it differently. If I am acquisition, if I'm a contracting officer versus a core, I may look at it differently. You understand? So by having different people on this team, what that allows me to do is to work together as a team and empower each of the people that are on that team to make decisions within their own area of responsibility, okay? Now, let's skip all the way down to C. So this team consists of all participants in government acquisition, including not only the representatives of the technical, and we talked about technical under best value, how important that is, right? Supply, that's logistics. Someone's got to actually get these things and store them and deliver them and all those kind of things. Procurement. A lot of people think that if you're not a contracting officer, a core, or a contracting specialist, that you're not in procurement. I'm here to beg to differ with you. If you are a financial manager, if you're a manager of a core, or a contracting officer, a PM, or any of those kind of things, if you are a program, project, or product manager, you're all in the procurement system, okay? The legal people that are going to review those things, they're part of that system as well. But notice also the customers that they serve. One of the things that we have to keep in mind is that the customers that we have are the ones that are going to let us know when whatever it is that we bought satisfies their requirement. How many people include their customer when they're trying to make sure that they're satisfying their requirement? And the answer should be all of you. All of you should make sure that whatever you're buying, remember, go back to my house example. If someone comes in to work on my house and they're repairing my bathroom and they don't do that to my satisfaction, then I've wasted their time and mine, okay? I want to make sure that whatever it is that they're doing for me in my house, with me as their customer, is to my satisfaction. And it should be the same with you when you're working with someone that is your customer, to make sure that what you're buying satisfies their requirement, okay? And notice the last part of this, and the contractors who provide those products or services, okay? Why do we want to include those folks in there? So we do that for a very good reason. We do it because all of you are hardworking. You're hardworking people. You sit at your desk, your head's down, you're working on all the things, you take stuff home with you. Some of you are checking your phones as you're driving into work instead of paying attention to the road, because I saw you this morning. So the whole point is that these vendors that are out there are trying to survive past that 3-year window that they fail. And so since they're trying to survive, they're looking for, how can I be more competitive? What can I do to make my products or my services better? What is it that I can do to give myself a competitive edge? What is it that I can do that can patent this so that I have control of it for the next 7 years or 9 years or whatever it is that patents run for these days, right? And so when you sit down, you look at that, those are all the things that we want to keep in mind. So the contractors, and when we do market research, we have to include the contractors because they're the ones that are going to be providing these goods or services, right? So they are important to think of as being a part of this team. Now, they may not be in the room when you make the decision, but that information that they provide to you is going to be invaluable, okay? Any questions? So let's get to the last part of this then. The role of each member of this team is to exercise personal initiative. Who knows what that means? Exercise personal initiative. What that means is don't sit around waiting. You initiate. You start this. You take charge. You use all of those attributes that we talked about, right? Your experience, your expertise, your education, so that you can make sound decisions, okay? So when we look at this, we want to exercise personal initiative and sound business judgment in providing the best value product or service to the customer's needs, okay? Now, this last part of this sentence is something that no contracting officer, sorry for the one that's here in the room with you, but most contracting officers will not tell you is in here. But it says, government members of this team may assume that if a specific strategy, policy, practice, or procedure is in the best interest of the government and is not prohibited by law, executive order, blah, 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 then that procedure is a permissible exercise of authority, okay? That's almost like a get out of jail free clause. And the reason that we have that clause in there, the reason that clause is put in there, is when you go back to that sound business judgment that we have given you the ability to use, your initiative that we talked about you using, that acquisition team that we want you to be a part of and contribute in your area of expertise. The reason that all of this ties in together is this is the guidelines that we and the federal government would like for you to use when you're spending that $400-500 billion in contracts that we're talking about. So any questions on FAR Part 1? I know that that's kind of a detailed explanation, but I think it's important for us to get onto that page as we have this conversation, because as you can see, we've already started talking about small business. We've already talked about how we want to spend this money wisely, how we want to have competition, how we want to do things so that we can be effective and efficient, which is some things that we looked at under your strategic goals for your organization, okay? So what are your questions so far? So I promised you that we would take a break about every 50 minutes. It's about 9:25. We're going to take a break for 10 minutes. We're going to come back in here at 9:35 and start again, okay? So for those of you that are watching on YouTube, we're going to start back again in 1 minute. Okay, so let's go ahead and get started back. So when we last spoke, we were talking about the FAR Part 1, and that's all the stuff that was on the bottom part of that handout there. If you guys have that, you can keep that and you can make notes on it and do whatever you want to do with it. We've gone through and talked about best value. We've talked about some of the competitive things that we look at as far as small businesses with woman-owned businesses, minority-owned businesses, veteran-owned businesses, service-disabled veteran-owned businesses, and historically underutilized business zones, okay? So any questions on anything that we covered in that first hour, including the introductions? So speaking of introductions, we actually have Anita Allen, who is your sad boo, and she'll tell you what that is. So Anita, would you like to introduce yourself, please?
Hi, I'm Anita Allen. Is this on? It's on. I'm Anita Allen. I'm the small business specialist that is currently supporting CMS. I actually, as a small business specialist, I'm involved, I should be involved in the acquisition planning process before it gets to the point where you want to put out a solicitation. I sign off on a lot of your requirements, and I'm always here to help out. I'll be here all day. I'm always here to answer any of your questions. I am in the global. If you have any questions about the small business programs that you didn't get in this training today, you're always welcome to reach out to me. I do ask when you do reach out to me, also reach out to the contract shop. I actually sit in OAGM. So I'm right there with the contracts people. Thank you.
Okay, so speaking of small business, the Small Business Administration was created in 1953. It is designed to do all of those things you see there, to aid and counsel and assist and protect the interests of small business concerns. So all those small businesses that we talked about in the first hour, they're trying to preserve the free competitive enterprise and to maintain and strengthen the overall economy. So small business is the lifeblood of our country. If you've listened to President Trump, President Obama, President Clinton, President Bush, all of the other presidents that we've ever had since I've been around always emphasize the fact that small business is really the lifeblood of our country, okay? A lot of people think that because Google or Microsoft hire so many people that they must be really, really important to what we do. They are important, don't get me wrong, because they do bring in billions of dollars. But I can tell you, when you look at the amount of money that is generated by small businesses, it pales in comparison. Small businesses far overwhelm all of those large businesses, hands down. So the SBA's role in government contracting is that the U.S. government is actually the largest single purchaser of goods and services in the world. Our contracting budget, our contracting goals, all of those things that we've kind of talked about a little bit, are all set up so that we can actually spend this $500 billion. You saw what the HHS budget was. You saw what the CMS budget was. Let's see kind of how we're doing, okay? So the Small Business Administration works with the federal agencies to award at least, this is the goal, 23% of all government dollars should be set aside for small business. And when I say set aside, that actually has specific words, so let me use some different language. 23% of the dollars, if we have $100 to spend for the federal government, $23 should go to small business. So it can go to small business as a set aside, or it can go to small business as a subcontract to a large business. But either way, 23% is the overall government goal. Each agency has kind of a slightly different goal, and we'll look at the goals that we have here for HHS, and we'll talk about those in a bit. So we want to help federal agencies meet their statutory goals for small disadvantaged businesses, for woman-owned small businesses, for service-disabled veteran-owned small businesses, and for small businesses that are located in hub zones. And we've already talked about all of those different categories. Any questions on any of those categories? Anybody not understand exactly what we're talking about? So go back and remember what I said about women being 53% of the population and less than 5% of the companies that do business with the federal government are owned by women. That's kind of a sad number. So we're trying to increase those numbers, improve those. And so what we're trying to do is help to meet the statutory goals that we have for this, and we'll talk about those. So in addition, they have an 8A, and we talked about 8A. These are socially and economically disadvantaged individuals and growing their businesses through a lot of different activities. One-on-one counseling, that's important, right? Training workshops, like we're doing today, and that we'll do with the small businesses themselves. You'll see where the Small Business Administration goes out, and if any of you ever get a chance, which I hope that you take the opportunity today after this class, to go to the Small Business Administration website and look at some of the things that are available for small businesses to increase their probability of success, okay? So in addition to that, we actually look at matchmaking opportunities. What we'd like to do is see if there's a way that we can team a small business with a larger business to give them a better chance of being successful. So we have a mentor-protege kind of program. We try to give them opportunities where they get to match up with some federal buyers that are specifically looking for products that these small businesses have. So we're taking them and guiding them to the people that will spend the money buying the products or the services that they are offering, okay? This increases their probability of success as well. We also help them in the areas of management, where we can actually sit with them, not me, but the Small Business Administration sits with them, with their different counselors that they have to help them become more successful. So the Small Business Administration and your small business advisors here within your agency, classes like this, these are all designed to encourage you and to encourage them to get together. We want you to choose small businesses, and we want them to choose you, okay? So not only do we talk to them, but we talk to you to encourage you to use them, okay? And that's one of the things that we'd like to do. So how do we do that? We set up goals. And so these are the goals that we have within HHS, and this is a scorecard. So back in 2015, you can see that overall, we set aside $5.4 billion, right? $5.4 billion with the B was set aside for small business. And then, and then in 2016 is where we actually spent the $5.4 billion. So the goal was for 2016 was 22.75. And the reason I put that in green is because we actually exceeded that goal. So the goal was 22.75, and we actually set aside 23%, which is really what the national federal average is, so that's actually a good thing. For woman-owned business, we did really, really well here. You can see the goal was 5%, and I said that we only have 5% across the federal government, and we really do have something either 5% or less across the federal government, but here at HHS, you guys are actually doing about 7%. But think back to what I said. 53% of the population, and we're doing 7% and patting ourselves on the back, okay? So that number could be and should be considerably higher, okay? That's our goal for now, but we're going to see if we can work to get that goal increased. For overall small disadvantaged businesses, that's the 8 A's that we talked about, you had a goal of 5%, you did 10.86%, so that's great. So where'd you fall short? You fell short in a couple of categories. The first is service-disabled, veteran-owned small business. You had a goal, which was actually a pretty meager goal of 3%, and you came in at 1.56%. You had a goal in hub zones of 3%, and you came in at barely over 1%. So if you have a choice and you have an opportunity to actually increase and improve these numbers, that's why we have Anita here, so that we can talk about ways that we can increase those numbers. We can do better with those numbers by going through with some of the things we're going to talk about here in a bit with market research and making sure that we're being totally inclusive. And I'm going to give you some tricks that you can use to make it so that you will be a little bit better consumer and be able to take advantage of trying to be the responsible person with your contract for helping us to exceed these goals, okay? In addition to the regular prime goals, we have subcontracting goals. This is when a business is a large business and we ask them to set aside some of their business for small business, okay? Does everybody understand the difference between the top and the bottom? So when we're subcontracting, the goal that we had overall was 33%, and we didn't make that goal. So we were only at 29.9%. We exceeded it for woman-owned. The goal was 5%, and we actually did 6.7%. We exceeded it for small 8A kind of companies with 5.4%, but once again, we missed it for service disabled and for hub zone, okay? Didn't even kind of come close. Missed it by over 50% for service disabled veteran-owned small goals, and significantly missed it for hub zones. Hub zones are tough, okay? Because what happens with hub zones, and we'll explain this later, a certain percentage of the workforce for that hub zone company has to live in the hub zone, okay? And that's a tough standard to meet because sometimes those hub zones don't have a lot of the technical proficiency and the resumes and the past performance that we may be looking for to actually give them the work that we're talking about, okay? So I understand that, but that still doesn't mean that we can't try harder. So just keep that in mind. We want to try as hard as we can to see if there's some things that we can do to try to make it so that we're not only green in all of these categories and all of these categories, we want to make sure that we're going to be able to exceed these and actually improve the actual goals that we have to the point that they become even more significant, okay? These goals are attainable, and we should be able to meet or exceed those in almost every case. And in some agencies they do, but in most agencies, the hub zone goals are hard. The service disabled veteran goals are hard as well, even within places like Department of Defense, okay? So what is one of the general policies? And this is basically explaining how we end up with a person like Anita. The functional management responsibilities of the department for small business are delegated to the SADBU, okay? And the SADBU director will exercise full management authority over the small business program. We have a small business specialist who shall review and make recommendations for all acquisitions. So one of the things that Anita said when she introduced herself is that she signs off in some cases on your acquisitions to show that you have considered or selected or that your numbers are things that are going to help us to get to some of those goals. So just make sure that you include her in this, and that's not something that comes out of HHS, which this is an HHS policy that is a supplement to the FAR policy, because FAR Part 19 has all of this information in it. But specifically for you, we want to make sure that if there's a way that we can increase the amount of small business that we use, that we take advantage of that, okay? Any questions on SADBUs and what we're trying to accomplish here with small business as we go into acquisitions? Yes, ma'am. Can I get you to grab a microphone? Right there.
Just had a question about the disabled veteran. What is the percentage of disability to qualify for that program?
That's a good question. I don't know if I have the exact answer to that. I'll look it up. Walt, do you have any idea? Okay. So I think that any percentage of actually disability, 10% or higher, should qualify you, but I'll have to check. Okay? I'm sorry? Okay, so Anita recommended that you actually go to the VA website for Veterans Affairs, and they can help you to do that. Okay? Any other questions? That's a great question, though, because I actually hadn't thought about the percentage of disability, and I think I may have seen it. And when I do these, or when I work with people that are doing these, and I actually have friends that own service-disabled veteran-owned companies, so I probably should know that, okay? So what are some of the acquisition initiatives that we have that I want to make you guys aware of? So we've already talked about SECA with the competition and contracting thing. We've kind of covered this far part one, where one of our goals is to make it so that instead of doing things individually, you start thinking as a team. I don't know how often you guys have ever been in an environment where sometimes when you have this team, you think to yourself, boy, if I didn't have this whole team and I got to make the decision myself, I'd be done now. But what you would have is your opinion. If you actually work as a team and get other people to contribute, then it's amazing by bringing in these different ideas, these different perspectives, these different experiences, these different expertise people, then what that does is it allows you to actually come up with a better product in the end than you would if you actually sit down and did it on your own. The second initiative, though, is this thing that's called performance-based acquisition. So one of the things that we do with performance-based acquisition is we actually ask that you, instead of going out and telling the vendors, telling the contractors what it is that you want them to do, you tell them the results that you're looking for, okay? I like to use the example of kind of the difference between a SOW, a statement of work, and a statement of objectives to help explain this, okay? So when we use a SOW, and all of you are familiar with the statement of work, who's not familiar with the statement of work? Everybody's familiar? So if I even do something as simple as go out looking for a ceramic cup, I will go out with a request for proposal or a request for quote for that cup. And when I go out for that cup, I will describe it and say I want something that can hold about that much water, that's round, that's got a little handle on it that I can hold with 2 fingers, whether I'm left-handed or right-handed. And when I put it on the cabinet, it won't spill, it won't turn over, it'll sit there flat. And then I go out for that ceramic cup, and I go out to all of you, everyone in here decides to give me a proposal, and this young lady's proposal comes back for $2, and that young lady's proposal comes back for $1.95. I'm going to buy that cup for $1.95 because you're going to give me exactly what I asked you to give me, right? And the only difference between the cup that you give me and the cup that she gives me is the price. So performance-based acquisition kind of turns that around a little bit by using what we call a statement of objectives. We go out for a vessel that can hold at least this much liquid, and we want it to be able to be held in either our right hand or our left hand with at least, maybe 2 fingers or with 1 hand, and it shouldn't make any difference. And we want to be able to put it on the table without it spilling. And that's the only guidance that we give them. We don't tell them we're looking for a ceramic cup or for a cup that holds 8 ounces of liquid. We tell them it has to hold at least that amount. So now when you come in with bids for this, you can get a plastic cup, a glass cup, an aluminum cup, a cup that keeps things hot or cold. You can get a cup that it has a little top on it, and the top has a little drawer that opens up and you drink out of it and close it. You can have a straw that's attached to it. You get the idea? So now by not telling them that you were looking for this ceramic cup, what you get is innovation. And so if you can get that kind of innovation with a cup, imagine the innovation that you could get if you use something like performance-based acquisition for the things that you're buying, okay? And that's the perspective I want you to bring to, is just think to yourself, instead of telling the vendor what the answer is, tell them what the results are that you're looking for, okay? And so that's an important concept, and that's why that's kind of a, I hate to say it's a new initiative, but it's kind of an initiative we want to take advantage of. We're going to talk about this later with this 15-day invoice payments. Small business vendors have been complaining for years that one of the reasons that they're not successful is because the government doesn't pay them in a timely fashion. And that's probably true because their invoices are usually bad or because they didn't put them in to us in a timely fashion. But all of that now goes away because our goal, and it's a goal that we're coming pretty close to achieving across the federal government, is we want to pay all small business vendors within 15 days. So 7 days for the core to approve, 7 days for finance to approve, and on the 15th day, whoever your finance center is cuts the check and sends it to that vendor, okay? So if they're, yes ma'am.
I just want to add something to this. What I've noticed here at CMS is some contracts do not have incorporated a clause to pay your subcontractor small businesses within 15 days. And that's one of the things our office is going to be looking at. So you want to make sure in your contracts that your prime contractor is paying their small businesses within 15 days also.
Okay. So one of the things that they're doing now as part of this OMB guidance is they basically came out with another phase to this in 2014. And they said that if you have a large business that has a small business component, very similar to what Anita's talking about. So it's a large business that's got 23% of their work set aside for a small business. We're going to pay them within 15 days, and we're going to encourage them to then pay their vendors as quickly as we paid them, okay? So they should be able to get this money to those small business vendors that are working for a large business, probably somewhere between 25 or less days, okay? But it's never going to get to the point that we start violating something like the Prompt Payment Act that says we have to pay invoices within 30 days or we have to pay interest. So across the federal government, we should be out of the interest paying business. Now, before we even get to that slide, I want to discuss a couple things because of what Anita just said. It is impingent on you as the core, and we have a lot of cores in here, when you review that invoice to make sure that it's a proper invoice, because with only a 7-day window, and this is not 7 business days, this is 7 days. So you need to do a couple of things that I call best practices, okay? The first is don't ever, or at least talk to your vendors during your kickoff meetings for your contracts about sending invoices out not on the Friday before a long weekend, because you're going to lose 3 of your 7 days right then, all right? So you're going to lose Saturday, Sunday, and Monday. And now instead of a 7-day window, you got a 4-day window. You understand? So encourage them as a best practice not to send out invoices on the Friday before a long weekend. The second thing is that if they send you an improper invoice, what you have to do is actually stop the clock. Now, what they do in most agencies, and maybe someone can speak specifically to what you guys do here, but when I say stop the clock, you call or send something to the vendor that says, I received an improper invoice and you need to fix it. You contact your contracting officer and let him or her know that you've stopped the clock until you get a proper invoice from the vendor. And then you contact finance to tell them that the clock has stopped so that they're not looking for this thing within that 7-day window. Now, when you get that proper invoice, the clock starts again, and now you only have 4 days left, we'll say if you use the first 3 days, for you to get it approved and sent to finance, and the finance still has their 7 days. So does everybody kind of understand that? So it's still 15 days, but if you have a proper invoice, you can stop the clock and then start it back again when you get a proper invoice. Is everybody clear on that? Yes, ma'am.
I just want to add one thing. If you're not paying your small businesses on time, they'll contact me. That's another one of my responsibilities, is to get involved when a small business is not being paid on time. And if it escalates above me, it goes to the SBA ombudsman, who gets involved, and it goes through the director of the OSTBU office, goes all the way up in CMS to investigate why we're not paying our small businesses timely.
Okay, thank you. So then the third bullet here talks about the use of cost-type contracts. So one of the things that we're encouraging, and I know some cases you as the core don't have control over this because by the time you see the contract has already been awarded. But for contracting officers that you work with and contracting specialists that you work with, we're trying to do as much work fixed price as we can. So if it's something that you bought before that you're comfortable with, then you can buy that using fixed price. And what that does, though, is the cost plus type contracts or a fixed price type contract is really about risk. A fixed price contract says that all the risk is on the vendor. We're going to give them this contract and they must deliver it for whatever that price is, period. Whereas with the cost type contract, what we're going to do is we're going to pay them, they're going to give us their best effort, and we're going to agree to continue to pay them as long as they give us the best effort until we get to some kind of a acceptable conclusion, okay? So that's kind of the difference, but we're encouraging that for things that you're really familiar with and that you've done 1,000 times already, use fixed price contracts, because we're trying to make it so that we can get some consistency in our budgets and we know how much things are going to cost and make sure that we take advantage of that, okay? The other bullet below that is talking about shorter procurement and administrative lead times. And this is just where we're trying to do things to streamline this contracting process. So overall, what we're trying to do is see if we can get more people involved, make better decisions, make sure that when we make those decisions, we have enough people that are participating in it, that these better decisions will allow us to move our PALT. That's what this procurement acquisition lead time is. So we can reduce that PALT to the point that we're actually awarding things quicker. Now, one of the things that I've noticed this year is that because we had such a truncated fiscal year, in case you guys hadn't noticed that, where we didn't actually get a budget until May, and once we got the budget, then we still only have until September 30th to get it all committed to contracts. So one of the things that that's done is that's actually forced us to be more efficient and effective in this whole contracting process. Has anyone here noticed that we're trying to get those things actually moving faster since we have a smaller window to work with? Because if you haven't, then you're probably not in the right procurement business, because where I am, that's been the whole talk. We got our money in May. They wanted it all under contract by June 30th. And I went, seriously? But actually what we did is we had actually worked a lot of contracts all the way up to the point that all we had to do was sign. At the point we'd identified the dollars, we knew how much, we knew everything, and so when we finally got the budget that was really kind of what we thought it was going to be, then we just executed. Okay, and is that how you guys did it here at HHS maybe? Okay. The other thing that we want to talk about is better oversight. Did you have something you want to say, Walt? Oh, is it?
We are looking up the percentage of disability on the VA website. Brenda's out there right now looking at it. It is on there. There's criteria that does establish the percentage an individual has to be disabled to qualify for small business type contracts. So we're looking that up right now.
All right. And so what I've seen in that category, in that area though, is that the Veterans Affairs Administration or whatever, the VA, Department of Veterans Affairs, they actually have people that certify their veteran-owned businesses and their service-disabled veteran-owned businesses, in addition to all of the things that they have to do through SBA. So Veterans Affairs takes the certification responsibilities pretty seriously, and they maintain a list of people of companies that are certified, and they only get to keep that certification for whatever the period of time is that's based on the SBA guidelines, okay? Yes, ma'am.
I do want to clarify that right now in civilian agencies, service-disabled, veteran-owned small business self-certify. They don't have to go through the VA to be certified with the VA. They do have to if they're doing work with the VA, and I believe DOD.
And DOD, yeah. They have to.
Now, I see that changing because we've seen some cases.
Yeah, where people were not quite as honest as they could have been.
Yes. And there have been some protests as a result of it. But the way it is right now in civilian agencies, they self-certify.
Right. And I actually, even though, you know, they can self-certify here, I would probably just kind of take a peek at that other list to see who VA has kind of said is certified as well, just to make sure, okay? And if they're not on there, then you can still have that conversation with them. But if they are on there, then that removes all doubt and you don't have to worry about it. So then the last thing down here, and I'm sorry, back under the contract incentives. So one of the things that happens is a lot of people don't understand why we need to incentivize contracts. You guys have probably heard of cost plus fixed fee and all kinds of different award fee and all kinds of different fees that we use to try to encourage better conduct and behavior and execution on the part of vendors, right? So incentives to me is where we incentivize that which is mostly important to us. Does everybody kind of understand what we use incentives for? So a perfect example of this, and this kind of requires most of you, since we're going through this whole thing in Houston now, that's been on my mind, but we actually had this huge earthquake back in, I think it was 1988, right in the middle of the World Series. I don't know if you guys remember that, but it was in San Francisco, and it was one of those kind of Oakland was playing San Francisco in a World Series, and they were in San Francisco for a game when this major earthquake hit San Francisco, and bridges collapsed, And so the reason I bring this up is that they actually had a bridge that went from San Francisco to Oakland, that part of that bridge collapsed. And so all of a sudden you couldn't do any commerce between these two cities unless you were willing to go across the Golden Gate Bridge and drive for like 4 hours around to get to Oakland, or go down to San Jose and come up, which would take like 4 hours to get there. And so literally by the time you got there, it was time to turn around and come home, right? So it wasn't real useful for that period of time that that bridge was down. So the city of San Francisco, the city of Oakland, the state of California, and the federal government got together and said, we need to fix this bridge between the two cities as quickly as possible, because, and I'll make up a number here, they were doing $20 million worth of business a day between those two cities. So for every day that that bridge was down, they were losing $20 million worth of business, okay? And so, excuse me, they went out and contracted with a combined team of vendors, and they gave them an incentive that said, they came in with a bid that said they could do this in 90 days. Now, this isn't like your projects around here where they take it down at 9 o'clock in the morning and put it back up again at 3 or whatever. You know, it's like they don't do that. It was like there was no traffic. They worked day and night. They could work 3 shifts. They could do whatever they had to do. But since they said they could get it done in 90 days, the incentive was for every day that they were able to bring that in before that 90th day, they would get $1 million in incentive fee, okay? So to make a long story short, at the end of the day, they actually built the bridge back again to a better standard that was more earthquake survivable, and they managed to finish this in 80 days instead of 90. So they ended up making a $10 million windfall. And so the vendor's happy because they got $10 million that went straight to their bottom line, but the city of San Francisco, the city of Oakland, and the state of California were also doing a happy dance, because for those 10 days at $20 million a day, they were going to reap a benefit of $200 million for the $10 million that they paid for this incentive, okay? And so you understand why you want to incentivize sometime is because it actually is a benefit to us when you do that, and just figure out what is the return on that investment to figure out what it is that you're actually getting as a result of that. Does that make sense? Okay. So those numbers are not real. I don't know what those numbers were. I actually do, but I'd have to go back and go through my notes again. But that's just an example of how we can use incentive to make sure that it makes sense. And then the last thing down here is what I talked a little bit about when we were going through the FAR Part 1. And this is where we used to have this us versus them kind of mentality where we would try to win or they would try to win, and you know, one of us was always kind of mad as a result of that, right? So one of the things that we're trying to do in the spirit of cooperation now, and the FAR has done this, they have encouraged us to be more conversational with our vendors, to involve them more so that they kind of know what we're thinking. We're using a lot more requests for information, a lot more sources sought, a lot more information is available out there on FedBizOps as to what it is that we're thinking about doing, and that allows them to start planning. We have a lot of forecasting things that we use within the federal government with the APFS. I don't know if you guys have that kind of a system where you actually have projections of here are the contracts that we plan to let in the next year, 2 years, 3 years, or whatever. But vendors use those things so that they can plan for what it is that they can be competitive on and what they can take a pass on, okay? And when they do that, they're going to ask questions. They have points of contact on these things that help them to now become more engaged in helping to shape what it is that we're thinking about buying. Because what we know is what we know, and what we don't know is what we don't know, okay? So it's really important for us to be able to involve industry in this process so that we can have the best chance for both of us to succeed. How many times have you gone in and bought a car where you look in your rearview mirror and you see the salesman back there doing the happy dance and you're thinking to yourself, did I just leave a lot of money on the table? You know? And that's what we're trying to avoid. We want you to drive away with a smile, and we want that vendor to be back there doing the happy dance so that both of you have now had a win-win. So that's what we're looking for. Questions? Okay, so, and these are some regulations that have been around for a long time. Some of them actually were one of the reasons that I was originally certified in the Acquisition Corps when I was in the federal government. So part of this FASA, this Federal Acquisition Streamlining Act, basically talked about mandates that were going to maximize the use of commercial items. So when we think about commercial items, if you go to the FAR, which I'm not going to do right now, but I'll go to it a bit later, is we want to be able to use commercial products as much as possible. I came along in an era where we had mil specs, these military specifications, we had mil standards, military standards. We don't have a lot of that stuff anymore. We have a lot of commercial standards, and the commercial standards are now so good, things don't break. I mean, when's the last time you had a TV that broke? Look at your car. Your car now you drive for X number of miles before you even change the oil. You know, and I just drove a car for 200,000 miles that I never had to do anything to, but I just got tired of driving it. It's like, it's time for this thing to go. I need a new one, right? They don't break. The standards, commercial standards are really, really good. So there are three things that I want you to write down to keep in mind when you talk about using commercial standards. The first is see if you can use a commercial standard as is, commercial off the shelf, or non-developmental. They call it NDI. So a non-developmental item or commercial off the shelf are the first things we want to look at when it comes to using a commercial item. The second thing is, could we slightly modify the commercial item and then use it to meet our customers' requirements? And then the third thing is, you guys got both of those already? The third thing is we want to be able to see if we can possibly alter our requirements slightly and then use the commercial item. So you see why we're trying to encourage you to use commercial items. We want you to see if you can use it off the shelf as is, NDI or COTS they call that. We want to see if you can slightly modify the commercial item and then use it. And if both of those two fail, can you slightly alter your requirement and then use a commercial item, okay? So when you're looking at these businesses and they have something that's close to what you want, let's see if there's a way that you can make that work, okay? I know that we're in the business sometimes of making it so that it's got government whatever is good enough for government work and all these other kind of things that you've heard in the past. But a lot of the stuff that we buy now, laptops, phones, you guys use the iPhones here, I pretty much bet, right? And the reason we're using a lot of those things is because their technology is really, really good kind of as is. Now that we have the right to actually get, to be able to use our software on these telephones and on some of these laptops, then that has made it so it's even better. And that's what I mean by modifying it slightly and then using that Dell laptop or that whatever kind of laptop that you're using. But the nice thing is we're using commercial standards and we're making these modifications so that we can take advantage of it. So we want to maximize the acquisition of commercial items and services, and we want to acquire those items in a manner similar to what the commercial businesses do. So we want to make it so that our ability to buy things in many cases is going to be aligned more with the way the commercial sector does business than it is with the way that we did business in the past, where we mandated SOWs and we had, you know, all these kind of things. By now, going out and saying, tell me what you have and let me see if it'll work for me, okay? And by having greater communication, which goes back to what we talked about in those initiatives on the last slide, then that allows us to figure out what's out there, what I call the art of the possible, and we'll talk about that some more when we get to market research. So two of the biggest challenges that were brought on by this was that many of the old school contracting officers that we had were not comfortable with buying more commercial items and with putting more attention to market research. They preferred to go with, this is what we've always done. So does anybody know what the definition of insanity is? What is the definition of insanity? It's continuing to do the same thing and expecting different results. You guys agree with that? So what do you think happens when you continue to go out with the same sows and the same, you continue to get the same stuff and you wonder why you're not making any progress, and the reason you're not making any progress is because we're hesitant to do those things. We need to be open to doing those, and that's what FASA and FARA did, is that they allowed us to say it's okay to be open. It's okay to have these conversations. It's okay to learn. It's okay to be different. It's okay to be innovative. It's okay to do something that's outside of the box, okay? So when you pick these small businesses that you're going to work with, or large businesses that you're going to work with, I want you to be completely open, because some of these folks are going to come in with things that you never thought about. One of the examples that I use, and I know this isn't a DoD audience, but this is something that you should all be able to relate to, is we had a requirement for increasing the survivability of an aircraft. And so when we were talking about increasing the survivability of an aircraft, you know, people came in and said, well, we need to put more armor and we need to do more things and we got to make it so that we can, you know, it was like, make this thing heavier and heavier. Pretty soon you made it so it was completely safe, but you couldn't fly it, right? And so someone came along and said, so what happens if they can't see you? Hadn't thought about that, right? So that's one of those ones where someone came in from a direction that none of us had thought about and said, if you reduce the radar cross-section, go figure, it's going to be harder for them to hit you, and if they can't see you, they can't hit you, so you don't need to survive these big weapons. What you need to be able to do is reduce your signature to the point that they can't find you, all right? And by doing that, they increase survivability. Now, how many people think that those of us that were working in the Pentagon at the time thought about that? And the answer is none of us. None of us thought about that. But the nice thing is that someone did, and when they pointed that out to people, that's how we ended up with like stealth technology, okay? So just think about that when you think about thinking outside the box. Think in terms of how can I come up with something that answers, that gives me the results that I'm looking for, in this case, increasing survivability, but is it something that I would have never thought about without including all those people we talked about on that acquisition team? So does that make sense? Okay. So let's see what we're doing for time. Almost 10:20, so we're good. So one of the things that's kind of implicit in all of these things that we've talked about is that there's some changes in the use of market research to make it so it's actually more suitable to small vendors. And I really want to take some time to go through this, so why don't we take a break now, come back in at 10:30, or whatever time it is, 10:30, in 10 minutes, and we're going to get started talking about market research, okay? So folks, we're going to start back in 1 minute. Okay, so let's get started back. So the next part of this class, what we're going to do is we're going to talk a little bit about market research. One of the things I always like to ask is, how many of you have actually participated in market research? So I see about 2 or 3 hands. How many of you have bought a car, a house, a phone, a TV, or anything else of value within the last year? When you did that, did you use market research? Yes? Okay, you did. None of us are going to go out and buy anything in 2017 without doing market research, okay? So the thing that I ask people is you know, I just bought a car. I told you that because I got tired of my old car. And there used to be a time when I would go out to buy a car that I would go into the dealership. I'm from a little rural area up in Washington State. And when I would go into the dealership, because we only had 2 or 3 dealers in the whole kind of area around where I lived. And so you'd go into the dealership and the guy would say, Mr. Dedmon, I can sell you this car, but if you buy it today, I can sell it to you for $200 off of MSRP, manufacturer's suggested retail price. And of course I didn't know, you know. I'd probably looked at a 2-year-old consumer's report or something to see what the price should be when I walked in there, or I saw an advertisement in the newspaper on Sunday or something, and that's all I knew. That was as much market research as I could do because there was nothing else available. So fast forward to me buying a car about a month or so ago, where I go onto kellysbluebook.com, kbb.com. I went into Consumer Digest, Consumer Reports. I went on to Edmunds. I did every bit of market research that you could possibly do without leaving the comfort of my little living room, right, on my computer. And when I did that, I actually came up with exactly how much I should pay for this car and how much that person that was selling it to me would earn. And then I actually ended up going through a buying service because I could get it better there through my insurance company is a company called USAA. So I did it through them, and it was like the cheapest that you could possibly get it. But I did market research. I did it for a car that costs probably $25,000. Can you imagine that we're spending $500 billion that we would ever buy something without doing market research, right? So when you ask yourself this, do you do market research? Every one of your hands should go up is that you actually do market research when you're spending your own money. You do market research when you're spending the government's money, which, oh, by the way, since you're all government employees and you pay taxes, that is your own money. When you're spending the government's money, you're spending your money as well. So doing market research makes sense in you trying to become a better consumer. So when we look at the things that we're trying to achieve here, that's part of FAR Part 10. So there's an entire chapter of the Federal Acquisition Regulation that covers market research. That's how important it is, okay? So we have to do market research before we develop new requirements documents, before soliciting offers for acquisitions in excess of the simplified acquisition threshold. You guys all know what that is? $150,000 is the simplified acquisition threshold. So anytime you're going to buy anything that costs more than $150,000, you have to, by far, do market research. Before soliciting offers for acquisitions with something that's less than $150,000, when adequate information is not available or the circumstances justify the cost. So when does that happen? So you're buying something that's under $150,000, but it's important to the agency. It's important to your boss. It's important to you. You could do market research anyway. There's nothing that says you can't do it. It just says that you have to do it if it's above $150,000. But if it's under $150,000, I encourage you to do some limited market research anyway, okay? We don't want to buy anything without actually going out and trying to figure out what's available out there. We want to do it to any kind of an acquisition that could lead to either consolidation or bundling, or before awarding either a task or a delivery order under an IDIQ. Does everybody know what an IDIQ contract is? Indefinite delivery, indefinite quantity. All that basically says is, I don't know when I need something, that's the indefinite delivery, and I don't know how many I'm going to need when I need it, but I want to put a vehicle in place so that when I do know those things, I can issue a task order. Yes, ma'am. I can't hear you. Can you get to a mic there? I think, I'm sorry. I just couldn't hear you, and I want to make sure everybody gets a chance to hear you.
Hi, is that what they refer to as an umbrella? So we used to work with some of those with contractors, and it was like, whatever we need, we let them know when we need it, and they were supposed to supply it. So
they may have called it an umbrella. I mean, umbrella has a lot of connotations. That could be a bundle. It could be a number of different things.
Right.
But an IDIQ is specifically set up so that you have a larger competition and you narrow it down to some smaller group of vendors so that when you know how many of something you need or when you need it, now you issue a task order, but only to that smaller number of vendors. Some agencies have single award IDIQs, which I'm not a big fan of, but others have it so that you have maybe 4, and 2 will be large and 2 will be small. So if you need something, you know, you've always got all of those things that you're looking for, okay?
When I was in another component, we had one.
Yeah.
And they were like, well, we don't have enough people to get to it. So they put stuff on the back burner, and I had a problem with that, but I wasn't the director.
Right, okay. Yeah, so I encourage these. I like them because, first of all, when you do an IDIQ, generally you have this competition that narrows it down to whatever that number is that you're going to select. But even more importantly, they have all kind of shown you that they are very reasonable, right? They're responsible, which are things we're looking for. I mean, if they're going to win this contract, you're basically seeing that, right? You know what their prices are, right? Because they've had to bid those. And now when they do a task order, as a general rule, they're going to come in at an even reduced price from that. So from a government standpoint, we love using these because it gives us flexibility and we can buy things and still have all of that SECA requirement, that competition and contracting requirement I talked about, and then we get it again when we put out a task order because the 4 people or 3 people or whatever that are on this vehicle, we then have another little mini competition with them to win the task order. So it's a good thing. It's really a good tool to use. So anyway, so before awarding a task or delivery order under one of those or under a government-wide agency, acquisition contract or a major acquisition contract for a non-commercial item in excess of the $150,000, then these are all the times that we want to do market research, okay? Yes, ma'am.
Are you all familiar with the Spark contract here at CMS? We have 111 small businesses on that. Some of those small businesses, what it is it's a 2-tier.
Okay.
So the bottom tier, anything under $29 million is automatically set aside for
So
small.
it's within their NAICS code?
Unless the market research demonstrates that there's not 2 small businesses. And then we have the unrestricted pool, which has, I think, 48 larges, and any smalls from the small business pool can also compete in that. And of the 111, some of them are now technically larges, but there's a lot of fantastic companies on there. Then CCSQ has the Adele BPA for DevOps, which is all small businesses. So I'm seeing more and more, at least in the IT arena, I'm seeing more and more either BPAs for smalls or like the Spark IDIQ.
Okay. So let me explain what a BPA is, because we can't use these acronyms without explaining them, right? So a blanket purchase agreement is very similar to what we talked about for an IDIQ, but an IDIQ is a contract, whereas a BPA is a purchase agreement, but it's the same concept. You have a competition, you narrow it down to a small handful of vendors or one, and now when you have, and you use BPAs generally for like recurring requirements. I'm going to need this same kind of a service on an annual kind of basis. So I can put it on a 5-year BPA, we'll say, and then next year when I need more work, I just go out with the task order for that new work that I need, and only the people that are already on that BPA can compete for that new work. So you have a competition that basically says, I'm going to let this, it's going to be a 1-year base and 4 one-year options, and now those people that have made it into that smaller pool are the ones that we'll use for that, and that's called a blanket purchase agreement versus an IDIQ contract, okay? Questions? Okay. So I just want to make sure that everybody's, and I really appreciate your input, because one of the things, what she's talking about is really what we're talking about here, but we have what we call AWACS, right? An agency-wide acquisition contract. These are contracts that are only good within this organization. Some other agency coming in from outside may or may not be able to use that, and if they do in some cases, if we let them use it, we actually charge them a fee to use it. So that's one of the reasons that we maintain those within each agency, okay? Any questions kind of on what these things are as far as what we're looking for in FAR Part 10? So what is market research? Market research is where we're trying to collect and analyze information about capabilities within the market that can satisfy your customers' requirements. So notice those two words. We're collecting and analyzing information about capabilities. One of the things I like to explain to people is that when we go out and we're looking for vendors, we have to actually figure out what it is that we're looking for. We have to figure out what is it that would satisfy our requirement and what is our requirement without kind of telling them what the answer is that we're looking for. And that's a tough kind of road to go through, okay? So one of the things that you always want to do is you want to take that need that your customer has and narrow it down to some type of what I will call a capability shortfall. Is it something that I need to do faster or longer or better or brighter or whatever? And all of those superlatives that I'm looking for are the things that I want to put into what it is that I'm looking for, so that when I now go out and analyze and collect information about capabilities, that will be able to, I can look at those and see, do they have what will allow me to meet my clients, my customers, my program manager, my program office requirement, okay? And so if that's the case, then we continue with the market research. It's team driven. So I started out today talking about FAR Part 1, where we talked about that acquisition team with the technical and the supply and the procurement and the customer and the contractors. You remember that whole conversation? All of those things are part of this team driven, so that we have different stakeholders that are going to explore issues from their perspective. And that gets back to that personal initiative and sound business judgment we talked about. Because information changes rapidly, the members of this IPT must ensure that their data is current. So Anita was telling me during the break that in some cases you guys don't use your IPTs as well as you could. And so one of the things that I encourage you to do, and you know, that's something we can talk about during one of the breaks if you'd like to, or if you can bring it up as a question, we can kind of talk about it individually or collectively. But IPTs should help us to get to better solutions, okay? That's the real bottom line. But we need to develop acquisition strategies, which is one of the things we were discussing during the break. An acquisition strategy tells me a lot of things. It tells me what my independent government cost estimate is. It tells me what kind of a requirements vehicle I'm going to use, either a SOW, a SU, or a performance work statement. I talked about the SOW and the SU. The performance work statement is something that's kind of in between those two on that continuum of requirements. But more importantly, it helps me to understand what is the contract type of vehicle that I'm going to use. Am I going to go with the small business alone, or am I going to go with the small business that's a sub to a large business? Am I going to go with an IDIQ, or am I going to go with a BPA? You know, what is it that I'm going to do as my acquisition strategy? And now going forward, now that everybody's on board and everybody agrees that that's what we're going to do, that puts us in a better position to make good decisions. Okay? Does everybody understand that? Yes, ma'am.
I just want to add that when you all, are any of you all responsible for writing up the acquisition strategies? The acquisition strategy plan, not the acquisition plan. Make sure that you always include under the IPT, it doesn't have to be my name, just say include the small business specialist. That must be part of the IPT. And in the market research area, just put a general statement that you're going to work with the small business specialists and the rest of the IPT in conducting market research and looking for opportunities for small business. You don't have to have your market research at that point, and I recommend you don't have it at that point. Okay? Thanks.
Okay. So, the biggest thing that we want to make sure, though, is that we are trying to, when we do market research, we're trying to ensure that industry can respond to the customer's requirements, okay? So if we haven't identified those properly, if we haven't looked at the capability shortfall that we're trying to address, then there's no way we're going to get to the right answer because we're asking the wrong question, okay? So one of the things that I like to tell people is that market research, and this is one of our founders for my company. My company's called ASI. We used to be Acquisition Solutions Incorporated, but once we graduated from the small business program, we changed our name to ASI Government. But Chip Mather here was one of our founders, and he used to always describe market research as kind of the art of the possible. You know, when you sit down and you think to yourself, I don't know what the solution is, but I want to leave this as open as I can so that I'm not channeling everyone to the answer that I'm already looking for. How many times have you gone out and done something where you already knew what the answer was you're looking for, so you make all the math work out to get there? When you do that, remember my definition of insanity, right? If you do that, don't be shocked if you keep coming up with the same old answer. And one of the things I did the other day is I was over working with the DOD program, and I looked at one of their contracts, and their contracting specialists had actually cut and pasted like the requirements from one contract that had probably been cut and pasted from 800 times before, and there was a requirement in there for a camera-ready copy for something. And I went, who in 2017 even knows what a camera-ready copy is, right? And no one knows what that is unless you're older than I am or as old as I am, right? And that's back in the days when we used to have to put the slides together and paste the things down and they take a picture of it or whatever. So I was like, why is this in here? But what had happened is they had, you know, for the last 10 years, 15 years, 20 years or something, just kept putting the same old requirements in there. And no vendors came back and said, what the heck is this? You know, shouldn't this say Microsoft Word or PDF or something, right? But anyway, you get the idea. So when we look at the art of the possible, make sure that we're asking for the right questions. But the purpose of market research is not to screen or rank individual companies. We're not down to that point yet. What we want to know is are we going to have competition? That could be one of the questions that we answer, right? So we go out with the sources sought that allows us to get answers as to whether or not there's some people actually interested. We go out with the request for information, and those two are different. Most people don't know there's a difference between the sources sought, where we're trying to go out and see if we're going to get competition, and a request for information where we want companies to come back in and give us some good ideas, okay? So the request for information actually says, I'm thinking about doing X, and what I'd like is your ideas that can help me get to what X is, okay? And so that way, instead of you telling them, I want to buy a Dell laptop, what you say is I have a requirement to do some small lap size, you know, desktop size, whatever, computing, and I need to be able to do that in a device that will allow me to do X, Y, and Z. And that way, when they come back with the answer, now you've got a lot of flexibility as to whether it's this, that, or the other. But if you go out with all of the specs that hone you down to getting that Toyota Camry, don't be surprised if you end up with the Toyota Camry, okay? So I just did that. That's why I use that as an example. But you get the idea. So the purpose is to gather information about the marketplace. Who's out there and what are their capabilities, first. Second, you want to do it from people that are actually industry leaders. How do you know who the industry leaders are? Who's been in business the longest? A, who makes the most money? B, okay? Those are industry leaders. You don't stay in business if you're not leading your industry. You don't make a lot of money if you're not leading your industry. You understand? So that's how you can determine who the benchmark companies are, corporations are, who the leaders are, and whatever the business is that you're looking for, you can tell who those are because they generally have best practices, they have the right standards that they're using, they have, remember we talked about not using our specs, we're going to use commercial specs. Their specifications that they're working to are usually the top of the hill, okay? So when we say that we want to use industry leaders, that's why we want to do it. But the other thing is the government buys a lot of the same things in a whole bunch of different places. So don't be afraid to go check with your brother and sister agencies to see what it is they're buying that's similar. So if you're buying IT equipment, I have to tell you, there are lots of folks buying IT equipment, okay? So don't go out and, decide that you're going to do something on your own in some cases, because what you're buying, someone else may be buying. They've already done all the market research, and all you have to do is tag onto a contract that they have that may already be in existence. So you saw that thing that said GWAC on that last slide, that government-wide acquisition contract? Those are the vehicles that we can use where we say, let's take advantage of the magnitude of stuff that other people are buying. In my agency, I may only need 50 of something. In their agency, they may be buying 50,000 of something. So I can get the 50,000 price instead of the 50 price. So it's an economy of scale kind of thing. You understand? So anyway, don't be afraid to go and find out from the other agencies what it is that you want to have. Yes, ma'am.
Quick question for you. So you kind of mentioned or spoke of a BPA.
Okay.
So, and with General Services Administration and their Schedule 48s, they've already went out and identified. And so what I have found in the last few years,
Okay.
1 year they said it's this company.
Okay.
The next year a new company got it. But guess what? When we go out and I develop my SOW,
Okay.
there might be a whole lot of requirements that two different companies, this one is better at this one is better at that.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So now what GSA has decided, oh, well, both of these, for that reason, can now be a part of this BPA.
Okay.
So then we go into the next generation, and now there's a new company on the scene because they do something totally different.
Okay.
And now that's great. But not one of them can provide excellence in any one category. So basically what I have done is now, because I know now what CMS has required is that you
Okay.
do an exception. And the first time I provided an exception. So, and then the second time I provided an exception, because here's why we
All right.
need both of these. And now I'm at the point where it's like, okay, well, here's why I need both of these. Is there a problem? Do you see that being a problem with me having a purchase order with all of them? Because what I'm going to do in that is get the best value for the government in every single scenario.
So one of the things that we encourage, just because I'm in this business across the federal government, is that we encourage companies to come up with total solutions. And in some cases, that may require them to team. They'll have a teaming agreement they'll sign with another company that says, I'm really, really good at this, and you're really good at that, but in order for us to meet your full requirement, we need to work together. And by working together, I can give CMS a complete solution. I'm going to be the leader, you're going to be the kind of follower, and I'll be the prime, you'll be my sub, and we're going to go ahead and see if we can meet this whole requirement that way. Since we're already both on the BPA, we can work together to do it. So that way you have one contract with the prime, they have a subcontract with the other team, and they're going to be then on the hook to deliver whatever it is that they have to deliver. So that's one way you can do it. I'll talk to you about some other ways. When we get to GSA Advantage, I'm going to show you some other kind of workarounds for this, okay?
Okay.
So if I don't, be sure and remind me again, okay? Thank you. So do we have anyone else that's got some experience with that may want to talk to that? Walt, any ideas on what she could do differently?
Basically what you said.
To the mic.
I didn't know where it was. Basically what you had said, leader, follower, teaming, that type of thing, so that they can cover every element in the statement of work, not just a few and somebody else another few, but they give you the total. I know. You could do split awards, but that becomes cumbersome when you get to trying to administer.
Yeah, but then the government becomes the integrator too, which is a pain, okay?
Exactly.
Yeah, but now I think what I want to say is that it's a little different for me because of the industry that I'm talking about. Each of them are competitors.
Okay,
So, and both of them offer all of the services.
got it?
But they're not leaders in that particular platform.
All right. So I can
So
only
it's-
tell you that competition makes strange bedfellows, okay?
Right.
We found that since they have so many, small business, 8A kind of set-asides, that for me, being a large business, I have to, eat my pride and go,
Sure.
begging to the small business and say, please. Now, when work is set aside for one of these small businesses as a general rule, since I'd like to keep it in that context, 51% of that work has to be done by that prime. 49% can be done by whoever that sub is, whether they're small or large, okay? And so the nice thing about it is they may not have to come to me to get what they need. They can come to somebody else, but they already know that if they come to me, that you've already approved of me, okay? So I encourage, and you can encourage, and your SADBU
So-
and your other contracting people
Okay.
can encourage
We'll
them
do
to
that.
work together, okay?
Okay, perfect.
I mean, that's what you want to do is, we're trying to get them off of business as usual. We want to come up with creative ways that we can get our requirements met and still go with this whole spirit of cooperation. We're letting the government almost help them to form a teaming agreement, which is nice. And I've seen that a lot of times. I've had people come to me and say, if you really want to win this, you need to go work with, whatever. And we go, thank you. And we go work with them.
Okay.
I just wanted to jump in too. I've seen and have experience with major competitors working on integrated projects together. You have Bell and Boeing. They're major competitors, but they put an aircraft together that sometimes flies. And I say that tongue in cheek, of course. You have different systems where you have major competitors. They just protect one another through proprietary markings, and they don't divulge information. And any government person has a non-disclosure statement that they sign that say, well, I'm not going to tell GE what RC or what Westinghouse or somebody else is doing because they're competitors as well. You just have to guard that. But when they want the money, they'll be willing to work together to get where they need to go to.
And I will tell you that I have found in my IT contracts, absolutely. We've been able to get them to do that and to partner with it. The mailing industry is a little different bedfellow. And those guys, because the market is so small and steadily decreasing, everybody wants their fair share of it. So
one of
But
the
I'll
arguments
talk
that
to
you
her.
can use, and just, you can steal this, I won't even charge you for it. 40% of something is better than 100% of nothing, okay?
But with the blanketed, with me having exceptions to all of them, they actually are sharing.
Right. Well, I mean, but that's kind of a forcing function where you're saying, I'm going to give this to you and this to you, and you're like doling this out like it's their allowance. Make it competitive, and then that will force them to get to solutions that force them to work together, okay? And that's what we have to do, and that's part of what I was talking about with these initiatives, where if you have the conversation with them and say, look, the government can't afford, nor do we have the skill set to be the integrator for what it is that we're buying partially from you and partially from you. I want you as the prime to be the integrator, and you go find the other half of this solution and bring me a total solution. And then that's what we're going to work to. And that's how you handle it, is you just make it so that the onus is on them, but you're going to help them find and identify people that have the skill sets that they're looking for, okay?
Okay.
So anyway, I appreciate the question. That's a great question. And that's the way we want to work through things, though, is we want to be in a spirit of all of those initiatives I talked about, the spirit of cooperation, the spirit of competition, the spirit of making sure that we're doing things that are smart, the spirit of being more efficient, the spirit of being more effective. Okay, so market research actually falls into two phases. The first phase is what I call the strategic phase, and that's this whole art of the possible, right? And so when we look at that, we're trying to look at it and learn from either industry or other agencies, what are their best practices? When we get to the tactical side of market research, what we're really looking for is what kind of acquisition vehicles am I going to use? What specific vendors have the capacity or the capability or the ability to be able to respond to my requirements, okay? So when I look at all those things, that becomes very important. So I want to decide if I'm going to use a large business and a small. Do I want to use a small as a set-aside, where they can go out and find someone to partner with and give them 49% of the work? Do I want to use a large where I'm going to make them do 23% of their dollars to a small business? What are the capabilities that are out there? So when I'm going through and doing market research, I want to talk to enough people, enough agencies, enough contractors, enough everybody, so that at the end of the day, I feel like I am as totally prepared as I can be to be a good steward of the government's money and to be the best consumer that I can be when I'm going out to buy something, okay? So whether it's a service or a good, I want to make sure that I can do that to the best of my ability. So today we're going to kind of focus on the strategic phase because this is not a market research class. So I want to talk to you about how we can identify who some of these companies are and some of the things that we can do. So we've got a lot of things that we have that we can use. And let's first of all talk about why is it that even market research is important, okay? I've already talked about the fact that we want you to become an educated consumer. We want to learn about the potential solutions to whatever this capability shortfall is that we have, okay? Remember back to what I talked about, my problem is survivability. What are all the solutions? Don't close the door on anything, because if you don't close the door to anything, then anything is a possible answer, okay? We want to learn about some of the problems that they may have had. So when I'm doing market research, I want to know what were the pitfalls that you ran into. If you've done this before, what are some things that I can learn from you that I don't have to learn the hard way by screwing them up, okay? So when I go out and do this market research with small businesses, I'll bring them in and say, so what have you run into? What were some problems that I need to be aware of? If there's a way I can write it into this contract, let me do that now so that I can avoid the pitfalls that you've already been able to solve, okay? And so when I talk about mitigating these risks, remember what I said about the fact that risk, when I was talking to this young lady back here, risk is a function of likelihood versus impact. Put this into the context of you are commuting to work. When you commuted, when I came this morning over from Rockville, Maryland to here in beautiful outskirts of Baltimore, I had to go down 200, up 29, on 70, and up Security Boulevard. Is there any chance that traffic could be bad on any of those? And the answer is 100%, okay? So if I know that that's the chance to mitigate the risk, what can I do? I can leave early, right? Which I did, and avoided most of the traffic by leaving early. If I'd waited until 7:30 to be here at 8:30, I would probably have been here at 9 o'clock, okay? So even though my little GPS said it was 43 minutes, it would not be 43 minutes if I hadn't left at 6:15, okay? So as it was, I was here at 7 o'clock over at McDonald's having a big breakfast, okay? But if that hadn't been the case, I'd been here at 8 o'clock going, oh my God, where am I supposed to be? Who am I supposed to see? What, you know, and you guys would be looking for the instructor, and Walt would be up here going, I haven't taught this class before, but I'd be happy to talk to you. So anyway, you get the idea. So we also want to learn about what are some industry standards, okay? So we talked about using these commercial standards instead of mill standards, mill specs, and all those things that we used in the past. If you go to some of these ISO, these International Standards Organization standards, those are some pretty darn good standards, okay? You guys have seen the 9000, 9002, all those kind of things. But they have standards for all kinds of things, okay? And the reason that the commercial world is where it is now is because of these international standards. I used to work for a French company for 5 years. They used the same standards that I used when I worked at at L3 Communications, okay? So it was like standards are now universal. And they're, regardless of language, regardless of country, regardless of boundaries, standards are standards, and they're now good enough that we can use those as performance benchmarks for what it is we want to do. And then, once again, going back to my 3 things for commercial that I've emphasized, learn what it is that we can use that's commercial off the shelf, or if we can modify it, or if we can modify our requirement like I talked to before, okay? So any questions kind of on that? So one of the things that I like to do is, you guys have a page here that talks to a bunch of things that we want to do. We want to talk about incentives, and I've already kind of given you an example of an incentive that I pulled out of the history books there from that bridge collapsing in that baseball game, right? We want to reduce the risk of doing business for both the government and the contractor. And when we say reduce the risk, that just means that we're going to try to identify all those pitfalls when we have this conversation with these vendors. And I know you're saying to yourself, how am I having these conversations with the vendors, and what does that entail? What are some things that I can do to try to get this information that I need, right? So one of the things that you have, and I actually have it as a slide that I think is coming up here at some point, but I'm going to go to now, back to the FAR, so I'm going to hit escape here. And if you go to the FAR, there's a chapter that's called FAR Part 10. This is the entire FAR Part 10. It's only a couple pages, but it has all of these things in there and what they do, and here they describe market research and how you have to do it appropriate to the circumstances and all those things that I've already talked about. But if you continue down this, one of the things that you'll see when you get down here to procedures, and if you go all the way down to 2, then this is called Techniques for Conducting Market Research. Can everybody see that? Techniques for Conducting Market Research, which is right here. May include. Now, remember what I said that I did for market research when I was going to buy my car? One of the things I didn't tell you is that when you're getting ready to buy a new car, you tend to see a lot of those cars on the road. So I was looking to buy a new Toyota Camry, and I wanted to kind of see what's changed. And so, and I know this sounds really, really crazy for some large black gentleman such as myself to go walking up to someone that's got a similar car and just saying, how do you like this car? What do you think about it? Is this the car that you would buy again? What's, you know, and I'm going through my whole inquisition process, and you could tell that they were like, holy crap, who's this guy and what's he about, right? I was just trying to get information. But one of the techniques that actually is listed in the FAR is contacting knowledgeable individuals in government and industry regarding market capabilities to meet your requirement. So that goes back to what I said. Talk to people from other agencies, talk to people from industry. 2, review the results of recent market research. So if you guys have any kind of a repository, and I don't know if you do, but some agencies do have repositories for market research, go there, see what's already been done, and use that as your starting point instead of using this as your starting point with a blank piece of paper. If they've already done some market research and it was 6 months ago or a year ago, figure out what's changed. But if they've already done some of that, that's a good starting point instead of a blank page, okay? 3rd, publishing formal requests for information. I talked a little bit about this. That's that request for information, the RFI. What it doesn't say here is a source of salt as well. Both of those can be used to do market research. You're publishing this so that anyone in the world that's interested in doing business with HHS can go to FedBizOps, the Federal Business Opportunities page. How many people have been there? Almost everyone. That's good. That's a good thing. FedBizOps is actually something that's so easy to access to see what your agency is doing. So if I'm interested in doing business with HHS or Center for Medicaid, Medicare, trust me on this, I can go to FedBizOps and put in HHS, CMS, and it will come up and tell me every contract that you guys have that you've done in the last year, okay? I'll show you that after the next break, or probably after lunch. But the bottom line is that that's a good site to use to do some market research, because now you can kind of put in what it is that you're interested in doing, and when you put that in and do a search, you can see who else may be doing that, okay? So that's a good tool to use. So think about using FedBizOps, the Federal Business Opportunities page, as a potential source for doing market research, okay? So, 4, querying the government-wide database of contracts and other procurement instruments. So you remember that past performance information retrieval system that I told you those CPARs went into, and they're in there for 3 years? That's a good place. They have a thing that's called FPDS, the Federal Procurement Data System. You can't get in there, you can't get into PPERS either. Your contracting officers and contracting specialists can get in there, and they can look back at that 3-year look back. They can go in FPDS and see what other contracts do we have that you can use. And in many cases on your acquisition websites, you'll see other vehicles that can be used across the government, okay? Then we're down to participating in interactive online communications. So this is new, okay? What a lot of people don't know is that for those of us that have been around for a day or two, we're not as comfortable with computers and using the internet to do searches and things as some other people that may be a little bit less seasoned than we are, I shall say. And so if you go back, and I'm going to use another one of my bad examples here again, but my example is they had a bombing at the Boston Marathon here a couple years back. You guys remember that? So when that bombing happened, they had a site that they called a crowdsource, where every picture, every photo, everything that was, documented during that race was able to be posted on one website. And that website was open to the general public. It was also open to the Boston Police Department and the FBI and, CIA and all these other people that were looking for terrorists, but it was also open to Jane and John Q. Public. And so, believe it or not, Jane Q. Public was one of the people that actually spotted the photo with the guy putting the backpack next to the family that he blew up, okay? And then, once they identified that person dropping the backpack and walking away, they followed the other photos, and when he got to his car, I know a lot of you thought, wow, the reason that they were able to do that was good detective work. It was good detective work, but they were able to follow him directly to the car. So when they stopped that car at that intersection and had that shootout, they knew specifically which car to go to because of Jane Q. Public identifying the person dropping the backpack and them following the trail that led to the car, okay? So that's what sometimes crowdsourcing can give you. So one of the ways we use crowdsourcing as part of market research now is instead of posting something on FedBizOps, which we do, is we will post a website that's like a chat room or a bulletin board on FedBizOps, and we will allow them being not just the usual suspects that you would always get that respond to your work and the 6 contractors that she was talking about there that can do X or Y. This is people within those companies. This is people that have no affiliation with HHS. This is people that have an interest in the science or whatever reasons. They will come onto there and you will listen to some of these conversations and you can decide then, and it's a bit more time consuming because you have to do some, funneling down to get to what you're looking for. But the bottom line is it becomes a bigger pool of information that you're getting there. And if you take those resources and bubble that down to the people that can actually make a difference or give you some ideas that you would have never thought of, that's where we get those things now using this online resource, okay? That's what crowdsourcing can do for you. And it's not something that all of us are comfortable with right now, but it's something that is now in the FAR, and we're encouraging you to use it, okay? The other thing that we have down here is obtaining source lists of similar items from other contracting activities or agencies, going to trade associations, going to whatever it is that you think that you can get information from, and then finally reviewing catalogs, which makes sense. The last thing down here, 8, is the one I really want to focus on. Because one of the things that we talked about is we're trying to become more interactive. We're trying to become more involved. We're trying to become more participatory and more of a team player with industry. And we can do that by conducting interchange meetings. So when I say interchange meetings, a couple people, and I have to explain the differences here because it's important, is they confuse what an industry day is with what an actual market research one-on-one session is. So let's talk about those. An industry day is like we are here. You guys are all contractors, I'm the government, I'm on the stage, I'm telling you what I know. That's an industry day, okay? Industry days tend to present the government's point of view and we tell them exactly what it is the government is thinking, okay? If people are out in that audience, do you think they're going to raise their hand and volunteer some great information that you'd like to learn as the government? The answer is no. You know why not? Because they would be giving up their competitive advantage. They'd be giving away their intellectual property. They'd be giving away all those things that would allow them to win the business, right? And if they did that, that'd be another reason they'd be out of business because they didn't understand the whole concept of proprietary information or keeping things close to the vest, right? The second thing that you can do, though, is after that whole session is done with the industry day, is they can set up meetings to come in and talk to a government team one-on-one, okay? So when they come in and talk to the government team, we want to make sure that we kind of do that in the right way, so we'll talk about how we do that in the right way, okay? So any kind of questions on what the differences are between those two things? So these are all the techniques. So when we get to the slide on techniques, I'm not going to go through this again, but I wanted you to see that my slide is actually based on the FAR. It's direct, almost word for word verbatim from what is actually in the FAR. So when we talk about all of these things that we want to accomplish with market research, we want to reduce the risk, we want to get rid of any unnecessary tasks or unnecessary constraints. One of the things that I've discovered, I told you I've been doing this since 1985, the government is the most constraint-creating place that I've ever seen. We put things on there that no one even knows why they're there. Remember I talked about that copy, camera-ready copy thing or whatever? We tend to say, gee, there must be a reason this is here. I'm not taking it out. So it stays and it stays and it stays, and we've been paying for things that we didn't need to pay for because no one cares and we wouldn't even know how to use it. So go through all of your solicitations, especially if you're working with your contracting officers and specialists as a core, and asking them, is this necessary? Is this something we need? Is this something we can get rid of? Does this add value? Do we really want to pay for this? Okay? And when you're asking those kinds of questions, what that does is it puts you in a position where you're helping them to meet some of those goals of becoming more efficient and becoming more effective as well. And you're making all of us better consumers, better, more representative stewards of the government's money, okay? We also want to make sure that we promote full and open competition. I talked about the fact that competition does two things. Who remembers what those are? Not you, Walt. Drives prices down, drives innovation up, right? And that's important. Competition is one of the things that will get us to the promised land, okay? And the reason we want to get to the promised land is because we get better products, better services, and cheaper prices, which is really what we're looking for. And the other thing that this really does, this whole business of going into this market research from a strategic standpoint, is it helps us as we go through this entire planning and preparation process for this acquisition process and getting these documents ready so that we can actually do the things that we have to do. And all of those are important. So who is responsible for conducting market research? So that's really why I started with that whole conversation about the acquisition team, is because the acquisition team is responsible for doing market research. When we bring those companies in to talk to us, now when you're out doing the research on your own and accumulating data and doing all those kind of things, that can be kind of individual things that you do, that you're trying to put together. But when it comes time to actually have conversations with these vendors, you need to have people in that room that represent an angle that you don't represent. So if you represent the technical angle, you need to have someone that looks at the procurement angle, the legal angle, the supply angle, the whatever angle, okay? So these are just some recommendations of what I think should be in there. So we have the customer, because they're going to tell you if this thing that you're looking for actually meets their requirement. Procurement, they're going to look at it. Finance, they're going to help you kind of see what this should cost, right? Now, I know that you're going to go through and do an independent government cost estimate. How many people have done an independent government cost estimate? So when you do that, one of the things that I'm always looking for is we're just looking for a ballpark. But we need to know if that ballpark is the Little League field down here in Frederick, or is it the Yankee Stadium, or the Camden Yards or whatever, okay? So that makes a big difference because they're both ballparks, but one is a little bit different than the other. So when I talk about ballparks, I'd like to see if we can keep the cost within 10 or 15% of what our estimate is, and that's why it's important for us to know what that estimate is, okay? So legal, we want to make sure that we're not doing anything that's going to get us in jail. Technical, logistics, and then anyone else that you think should be there. So these are just recommendations. Now, Anita said that she'd like to be a part of this. It always helps to have a competition advocate or a small business advocate that's participating in this, because when you're having conversations, especially with the vendor, they're going to give you 1,000 reasons why they can't use a small business, and we should give them at least 1 or 2 why they should think about it, okay? Including the fact that we're going to give them a requirement to do it, and they need to figure out how they're going to meet that requirement, okay? Each stakeholder should have related but different viewpoints. So if I'm bringing in the industry leader for X and a small business and a whatever, I want to bring in people that are going to give me a little bit different perspective. So I may want to bring in an agency that's doing this work to see what kind of pitfalls they had, and I have a set of questions I'm going to ask them. I want to bring in vendors, and in some cases I may bring in 3 or 4 vendors that have the same kind of capabilities and capacity and that kind of thing, just to see what I learned different from those 3. You don't have to bring in every vendor that's out there. I know some people will say, well, if I bring in one, don't I have to bring in all of them? And the answer is no, because what you're doing is you're looking for representation of these businesses, okay? So the FAR doesn't say I got to bring in everybody. It just says that I need to bring in enough that I have the information that I need. And if I'm going to get the same information from 19 vendors, maybe I can get all that information from 3 and be pretty happy with it, okay? So anyway, just kind of use your own common sense. We want the information gathered by the team to sort this information, analyze it, prioritize it, and then come up with some type of a report that basically says, here is what I learned during market research. So a couple of things. I'm going to go through some do's and don'ts here at some point. But the bottom line is that when you're talking to one vendor, you can't say, gee, I had contractor X in, and they told me, you know, because now you're sharing that proprietary information that they didn't want to have shared, or that competitive information they didn't want to share, or that intellectual property that they didn't want to share. You get the idea? So make sure that you don't mix one vendor's things that you learn with the other vendor that you're talking to. And you definitely want to leave anything out or something that they can kind of, when you step out of the room, they can look through and do whatever. I don't even like it so that if you're having them come, that you time these so that they can know specifically what vendors you're actually talking to, okay? Because they can just sit there in the lobby and say, oh, so you talk to them, huh? And they talk to them too, okay? And so just kind of keep that in mind as you're going through this process. You want to make sure that this report that you do is appropriate for the size and complexity of the acquisition. So if you're buying something that costs $200,000, you probably don't want to spend $150,000 doing market research, okay? And when you put together one of these teams, just think of what their hourly rates would be if you actually paid them hourly rates, and ask yourself, how many times are we meeting, how many vendors are we meeting with, for how long? And I'm going to show you a schedule that says that I like to do these meetings for an hour and then break down in kind of 10-minute blocks what it is I want to do during that, so that we as the government, not that I'm government, I'm actually a contractor now, but that the government is actually driving this meeting instead of letting the vendor drive the meeting toward being some kind of a business development session, right? So just make sure that you do those things and that we can keep this report down to something that makes sense for what it is we're trying to do, okay? Any questions? So let's see, quality control issues, a summary of ideas, and all those kind of things. I think I've talked all that, okay? Any questions? Okay, so this is that list of techniques that I talked about. Right? And these techniques are all those things. You have them now on your slides, and I think you were probably sent the electrons for these slides. So if you got any questions on any of these things, my information will be available, and you can make sure that you can contact me. But you can always contact Anita or any of the other folks that were involved with this. So let's talk about a couple of things. So those were all the techniques, and I already went through all 10 of those or 8 of those or whatever, so I think we're okay with those. So there are a lot of online resources that we can use. So one of the things I told you was when you're going in to do this market research, I said that you could use FedBizOps. So that is just FedBizOps, and if you do that, it will actually come up with the Federal Business Opportunities page. Or you can just type in Federal Business Opportunities and FBO.gov will come up, okay? FBO.gov is the Federal Business Opportunities page. The second one that I actually like to use a lot of is GSA Advantage, right? Which I don't have up here, but I'm going to show you in just a couple minutes. SAM is the GSA System for Award Management. Every vendor has to register for this site. You may remember that we used to have a site that was called CCR, right? Which was the Contractor Registry or whatever that was called, right? Central Contractor Registry, I think is what CCR stood for. SAM is the replacement for that now. So it's the System for Acquisition Management. And so SAM.gov is where all vendors have to register. You can find their cage codes there. You can find out all the information that you need for them, including whether or not they're actually a small business. And then they have the SBA site, which is this dsbs.sba. And what that does is it takes you to their dynamic small business search site, which is really, really good. So I've given you some information on the source of salt notice and what that's designed for versus the RFI that they talk about in the FAR, which is why I encourage this, is the source of salt notice is a government research tool to determine if there are 2 or more capable small businesses that can perform the requirements of a planned contract, okay? Because that way, not only do I have one, but if I have 2, then I have competition, which I've already told you what the advantages are of having competition, right? Yes, ma'am.
I just want to add that sources sought notices is the HHS preferred method of market research. It's not necessary, if you're buying simplified acquisitions and things like that, I don't think it's necessary for that. But your higher dollar procurements, I'm usually going to say, hey, you need to do a sources sought notice.
Okay. And I would agree 1,000% with that, not that you need my agreement. So one of the things I want to do now, let's see what we have next. Okay, so there's some other resources. So I want to take you out of here, and I actually want to go to GSA Advantage so we can talk about this for just a minute. I want to see how we're doing for time. 11:27. I promise you we're going to be out here for lunch at 11:45, right? So we're going to do that. So let's go to GSA Advantage. Now, I don't know how many of you have actually used GSA Advantage. How many people have used GSA Advantage? Show of hands. 2 people, 3 people. Okay, so here's the thing about GSA Advantage. GSA Advantage is like the government's Amazon. You didn't know that, did you? You didn't know the government had an Amazon, did you? So we used to call this FSS, the Federal Supply Schedules, and you would have to go to schedule this, schedule whatever for IT, schedule this for whatever, right? Now what they've done is they've taken all of that and they've actually put it onto GSA Advantage. And they broke GSA Advantage into kind of 2 areas. So the one area that they have is products. And if you scroll down, the second area that they have is services. So we're going to go through both here just quickly so you can see how you can use this to do market research, but it's actually a nice tool to use. If you have a government purchase card, you can actually add things to the shopping cart. You can see this says 0, but you can go through and add something to that shopping cart and then use the GPC, government purchase card, if you've gone and looked at 2 or 3 sources and buy it, okay? So that's a nice tool to use, and it's great for you. So let's say I'm looking for a laptop. We have a bunch of OIT people here. So I go under Electronics and Technology. Oops, that session was terminated. Let's go back to it, see if it's okay now. So let's go to Electronics and Technology. And when we do that, we'll go down to Computers. And when we get to Computers, we'll look for laptops. And so now I will get a whole bunch of laptops over here that you'll see that will list, I think, let's see how many I have here. I can't tell how many I have. So what I'm going to do, though, is I'm going to limit this so that I only want to look at laptops that are under $500, okay? So now the first 2 things, they're just maintenance, but then I'll start getting into these laptops. Here's one for $472, one for $498, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And so the nice thing about this is all of these laptops that are on there, the company that is providing these has a contract with GSA. So let me pick one of these. I'll pick this EEPC 1000, whatever. This is just random. And one of the things I like about this site, and it may be hard for you to see, but if you go to the site, you'll see it even better, is that they will tell you over here what the socioeconomic status is of the companies that have these, okay? So they have disabled. So you see this piece right here? You got small, you got woman-owned, you get it, so you have different people that are economically disadvantaged, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And if you want to look at all of those categories, if you go all the way back up to the top here, then over on this part of this, we actually have all of those. So if I really wanted a woman-owned small business, I could click that, and all of the computers that I'll have will all be provided by a woman-owned small business. If I go down here and click on the 8A, all of the computers that I buy will be coming from an 8A. Does everybody see that? So anyway, so now that we've sorted these by price, the nice thing is that I can go through and pick, we'll pick this one. What this does is it tells me what all of the characteristics are in a product description of what it is that I'm buying. So for market research purposes, you know how you have to ask the right question to see what it is you're getting? When you go in there, this tells you everything that you ever wanted to know about this laptop, okay? And you can see that it's under 500 bucks. You can see kind of what it is, and you can use this laptop as something that you're looking for. And by scrolling even further down, because they'll give you some of the related products, these are ones that are kind of near what you're looking for. But when you get down to this part, this is the actual company that is able to provide you this laptop, what their socio-statics are, that they can deliver 7 days after receipt of the order, that the minimum order is $100, and they can deliver it anywhere within the continental United States, including Alaska, Puerto Rico, and Hawaii, okay? So that's all good information that you got without leaving the comfort of your desk. And this is just for a laptop, but you could do it for any other one of those equipment things that are over on that product's top half of that list. So any questions kind of on that? Does everybody see how easy this is to use? How easy it is to sort? It's really, really kind of basic stuff, but it's just a tool that I like to make people aware of. If you're not using this, even for your own market research for something that you want to buy, okay? If you're looking for a TV or you're looking for a laptop, use this tool to help you do all of that market research that you never admitted to having done before, okay? And it really is a nice tool to have. So let's go back. One more. Okay, so we just went through kind of the product side of that, which is the top part here. The bottom part of this is the services side. So the nice thing that I like about the services side is that, you remember when I talked about the fact that when we're looking at resumes that we want to see what kind of experience and expertise and education the person has, right? And remember I talked about doing an independent government cost estimate? You may remember that conversation. So let's go back to our conversation on independent government estimate for just a minute. So let's talk about what an FTE is, okay? So an FTE, a full-time equivalent person, and I'll go back and show you on the one chart that had the budget for HHS, it kind of told you that there's 75,000 FTEs here at HHS. So that 75,000 may not mean that it's 75,000 people. It could be 150,000 people and they all work half-time. Or it could be some people that work 3/4 time, half-time, 1/4 time, and they add up when you add up the FTEs based on the number of hours that we're talking about. So here's how we come up with an FTE. We take the 52 weeks in the year times the 40 weeks that we have, 40 hours that we have in each week. So 52 times 40 comes out to 2,080, okay? You all get 10 federal holidays, so because you get 10 federal holidays, so do I. So we subtract 80 hours from that, and that takes 2080 down to 2,000. Because most vendors that do business with the federal government are reasonably competent vendors, that means that they give their people leave or sick days, and usually, as a minimum, that will be at least 2 weeks. So 2 weeks is another 80 hours, and that brings that number down to 1920. So that's one version of the FTE. Here in the Baltimore, Washington area, for most businesses that are competitive, they usually give their people 3 weeks of vacation. So what we actually use for an FTE for this area is 1,880 hours, okay? So one FTE is 1,880 hours. Now, when I show you these rates before you all have a heart attack and say, oh my God, we pay them that much money, those are fully loaded rates. What that means is that when we look at that price includes not only what I get paid, but how much they pay for my air conditioning and my heat and my parking slot and my whatever, my vacation time, those 10 federal holidays that I talked about. All of those things go into what they pay me. And to be perfectly honest, the biggest problem that I have in some cases is that federal people don't realize that your salary that you get only pays for your salary. And that in order for the government to have you here, they have to pay about 1.2 to 1.3% times that. So, I mean, 130% of that. So if you're making 100 grand, they're probably paying about $220,000 to $230,000 for you. And what they're paying for you is those 10 federal holidays, that air conditioning, that heat, the IT equipment they give you. You get the idea, right? All of that stuff goes in, and so when they pay for you and you know how much you're making, you got to figure that they're paying considerably more for you to be here, okay? To attend classes and to do all these kind of things. So just keep that in mind as I go through this process. So you can go to any of these services. I'm going to go ahead and pick professional services because I'm selfish and that's what I'm a part of. It's professional services, and if you go across from professional services, there's a thing down here that's called MOBIS, Mission-Oriented Integrated Business Services. And if you go across from there, there's a thing over here that's called Acquisition Management System or Support, which that's what I do for a living, right? And so what we'll see is that we have 335 contracts that are in here from a bunch of different people that do business with the federal government. So every one of these contracts is a contract with GSA. I'll pick this company simply because they're there. And the thing I like about this from doing market research, remember I want to contact companies and have them come in and talk to me. So you say, how do I do that? Generally, if you contacted a company and they didn't have one of these contracts with GSA, you would contact the company and it would say, dial 1 for Swahili and dial 2 for Arabic or whatever, right? You don't have to do that because with this contract, generally on the first page of the contract, they will have a point of contact. So they will tell you that the contract administrator is this gentleman, this is his phone number, this is his email address, and you could contact him and say, Mr. Spinard, I'd like to do market research for HHS with you or with your company. Can you direct me to the right person? And now with the name, email address, and a phone number for this person, they can direct you to who can provide you with what your answers are immediately instead of going through 47 people to get there. So that's the first thing I like about this page. The second thing I like about this is that they actually list the labor categories and the labor rates. And I'm sorry if I make anybody dizzy, but bear with me. So when you get down to these labor category descriptions, remember the 3 E's that I talked about? Everybody remember those? What were they? Experience, expertise, and education. Do you remember that? So when we look at this for any one of these labor categories, and all of these are set up the same way. They will tell you what is the minimum years of experience. They will give a position description, which is really the expertise that they're looking for. And then they will give what the minimum education requirements are. So if I'm doing market research and I'm trying to put together a list of people that I would like to have do the work for me, I can go to a company that I'm interested in and see if they have an actual contract with GSA. I can find their specific descriptions of labor. I can find out what their rates are, as I'll show you in a second here. And in many cases, those rates are actually escalated over the next 4 or 5 years, and they've already put in the escalation factor, which makes it easy for you if you're doing an IGCE to say this much for the base year, this much for the option year, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. You understand? Okay. So let's continue down. And at one point, eventually we will get to, after we get past all of these, we will get to the actual labor rates themselves. So these labor rates, which I told you are fully loaded. So let's say for an instructor in 2016, 2017, it's $195 an hour. And that's a fully loaded rate. So that instructor's not getting $195. This is what I explained to you so you wouldn't have a heart attack when you saw these numbers. That is what they're actually showing on this. This is the highest number that you could probably expect. When you actually went in and negotiated with this company or whoever, then you would actually try to get a lower price. The nice thing about using this GSA Advantage that I like is that to use their vehicle, you simply have to pick at least 3 vendors from this list to have a competition, okay? So that's the nice thing about it. So this is a site that you can use for a lot of market research. You can specifically find people that have the capability that you're looking for. They have the skill sets that you're looking for. There are people that you can actually go back in then into FPDS and into Fed BizOps and other places to kind of see what kind of business they've done. And the beauty of it is that if you do this correctly, this is a vehicle that will continue to pay dividends for your independent government cost estimate because you take that 1880 that I talked about times whatever the hourly rate is for the individual, and say you need them for a year, it's times 1880. You need them for 6 months, it's 940. You get the idea? It's really, really easy to do those kind of things based on labor categories and labor rates. Does that make sense? Has that made it so that you fully understand how we can use this tool? So when we come back from lunch, it's right now about 20 till, and I promise you I'd have you out of here at about a quarter till or so. But one of the things that I want to do is when we come back, we're going to go into Fed Biz Ops, and I'm going to show you how you can use that as a tool for market research as well. And then we'll talk about some other things this afternoon. We're going to be done. I think we're scheduled to be done by like 2 o'clock? 2:30? Okay, so we'll be done by 2:30 at the latest, okay? Maybe 2:15 or so, but we'll be done by 2:30. That's my goal. Any questions? Can you all leave here and make it back here by 1 o'clock exactly? Because our getting out of here at 2:30 depends on you being here at 1 o'clock, okay? Thank you.